Hi there. Indeed, we're talking about every Warframe augment mod, and by that I mean every frame ability augment mod. These, not every augment for any kind of thing in Warframe. That would be way too many. Timestamps are in the description. If you want to skip to a certain part, you're more interested in a particular frame. And yeah, I just hope these give you interesting ideas for useful and fun augments that you can use when you play Warframe. Let's begin. Behold, we're going to start with Ash. This is going to be in alphabetical order. I just don't think there's a particularly better way to do it. So let's begin with Seeking Shuriken. This is a great place to start. Yeah, you can easily make this reduce all armor. A really important part of Seeking Shuriken is that Shuriken is a one-handed action. You can cast it, you could spam it while firing a weapon. So you could have an assault rifle that has a lot of ammo in it and just spam Seeking Shuriken and everything will have no armor. It doesn't cost that much energy. You get 2 targets. You probably wouldn't want to spam it. There'd be some finesse to saving energy, but overall pretty good. Armor is a big deal. This is a very easy way to remove it on an ability that's fine. I guess it doesn't do much else, but you don't have to pay much to get this. I think this is B tier. Moving on to Smoke Shadow. This lets Ash's smokescreen stealth allies as well. Why? I'm not sure what this is for. This is one where I'm not convinced that you want to stealth your allies or that's like an important thing to do. But if you're convinced it is, it's not bad at it. There's a good radius. The duration isn't long, but you might build duration. I don't know. I guess Seeking Shuriken, maybe you'd build duration. That sort of matters. I'm going to say D tier, not because it's bad at what it does, but because what it does isn't that good. Moving on to Fatal Teleport, an augment that I have strong feelings about. This lets you, okay, I'm just going to read it. Teleport will perform a finisher on the target, dealing 200% extra damage, 50% of energy cost is refunded on a kill. It does 3 things. It lets you perform a finisher. You can already do that. Teleport opens enemies to finishers. Fatal Teleport literally just presses the button for you. I'm aware that there are a few, really a few, not a lot of enemies where it's hard to perform a finisher or you even can't without this. So it's not like it doesn't do anything, but that part is really not worth that much. You may not have known that it performs the finisher automatically, but it does. 200% extra damage. Finishers already usually kill pretty much everything they hit. If they're not, use a hammer or a Nikana, which do more, I think Nikanas, but hammers certainly do more finisher damage. And it refunds the energy. Teleport is a pretty cheap ability. The thing about this is that even if it made you even more better, is it really even making you better, whatever, at killing individual enemies with teleport finishers, that's not a good way to kill enemies in a horde shooter. So I just don't think this does anything. I want to say this is F tier, and the only reason I wouldn't would be because I think people would get mad at me. But unless you're doing something very strange, this literally doesn't do anything. So F tier for me. There you go. If you haven't already learned how I feel and how I'm going to rate these, you did just then. Rising Storm, 2 parts here. Combo duration. This is interesting. I think effects like this that let you basically mod a part of your loadout using a slot on another part of your loadout are generally pretty good. You could look at that as giving your combo focused melee build a 9th mod slot. That's really good. Since the other effect is kind of unrelated, I'll explain in a second, I'm going to say that that part of the mod is A tier. If you're playing a combo melee on Ash, it has 9 mod slots, as long as you're willing for Ash to have 7 mod slots. You should be. I mean, you don't have to be, but I think that's good. That's a good value proposition if you want it. Blade Storm also gives you melee combo. This is weirder, very separate too. If it's already a combo melee, I definitely don't think you care about this. I'm not convinced that you want to build combo and then do a heavy attack or something. Is that what this is suggesting you do? I'm not sure. I don't think. Not so much. So I'm going to rate that part a C tier. A D tier. That's going to be D tier because you could do that. It's not, and I bet if you did that, it wouldn't really be worse than just heavy attacking like 4 times with initial combo, but I don't think it would be much better either. And yeah, Blade Storm is fine. You can get Blade Storm to kill enemies. This is fine. I am going to say D tier for the combo part, but I think that passive combo duration that is not on a melee weapon is pretty A tier. That's good. Moving on to Atlas. So Atlas has 5 augments. Something that I'm going to note here is that I'm going to do the PvP to PvE ones that you can get from, it's Nightwave, right? Separately. I will do them, but I'm going to do them after everything else. There aren't very many of them, and I have some unique things to say about them. So yeah, we'll do those afterward. But Atlas has 5 augments because one of them is a passive augment, Rubble Heap. This lets you cast Landslide for no energy, double damage, and you move faster. I didn't really notice that part. When you're at almost maximum rubble, the max is 1500. Yeah, there are ways to get rubble through Landslide. No energy that's good. It's an ability you want to use a lot. It doesn't necessarily cost a lot of energy, but you benefit from using it a lot. That's not bad. Yeah, double damage is also nice. If you're going to be using Landslide, one of the roadblocks is that it doesn't really have damage multipliers. It doesn't crit. It doesn't have status effects that could make it do more damage. Usually combining base damage, maybe multi-shot or attack speed, crits, and a status effect that makes you do more damage. That's how things do damage in Warframe, and Landslide lacks some of that stuff. So getting a multiplier, a force multiplier back, that's really good if you're trying to do what it's doing. Again, with these, I'm trying to argue from the perspective of what the mod is trying to do. I'm not trying to argue that you're good or bad, whether you're using the mod. I'm arguing if you are doing the thing the mod does, is it good at doing that thing? And is that a thing that can be powerful to do if you want to do it? And in Rubble Heap's case, I'd say yes, probably A tier. It lets you spam an ability that can kill enemies in an AoE in a horde shooter. Good. And it solves one at least of the ability's problems, energy and then the damage. Speaking of Landslide, Path of Statues. This is a Landslide augment that leaves a trail that petrifies enemies. The duration is really long. The trail duration is long for something you're going to be doing maybe that much. And Atlas has another augment that lets you spam it more. I'm not necessarily rating these in the perspective of the Warframe that they're on. I don't necessarily think Atlas is the most amazing, but it doesn't matter, and people play Atlas, so I'm talking about the augment assuming you're playing the frame. Otherwise, why would you be considering the augment? And I think that in the context of Atlas and Atlas's other augments, this is pretty solid. Yeah, I would say a B tier. It's about as solid as the enemies it petrifies. Hahaha, Tectonic Fracture. This was solid enough already. Not really. I don't really think the walls do much. They don't. Yeah, sometimes you can do weird things with the index where you block off a goal or something, but besides basically bugging the game out, I don't think Tectonics already does much of anything except the boulder killing enemies at lower levels, and making 3 of them and not being able to make them boulders literally doesn't add anything. You could argue this makes the ability worse, which is probably what F tier should actually be, rather than Fatal Teleport, where it just doesn't do much, but I guess it's like whatever, it's not really making you worse off except for the mod slot. F tier. Tectonics is really what's getting the F tier. I don't know. Orgaze, on the other hand, this is a loot ability in a looter shooter. S tier, right? Well, there's a couple of problems. The first one is that it scales with strength. Well, scaling with strength wouldn't be bad, but it has a low initial value and then it scales with strength. 2 problems there. The first one is that if you increase the range with overextended, it gets worse, and you do want the range to be high. You don't have to use overextended, but it being a medium value and not being affected by strength would probably be better most of the time. It would save you mod slots, and meaning that it scales with strength also means if you try to stack Petrify, a helmet ability, onto another frame that has a loot ability, this will maybe pull you in different directions, because the other loot abilities generally aren't affected by strength. I don't think that's the end of the world. It's still more loot in a looter shooter, and yeah, building for more strength could make it cost more energy, but making enemies drop more loot gives you more energy. So maybe it's fine. I'm still gonna say A tier. I think it might be expensive to get it to work, but it's worth it because it's more loot in a looter shooter. Good stuff. Titanic Rumbler. This is another one that I'm going to argue makes the ability worse at what it's good at. I think the best thing about Rumblers is it makes distractions, and Titanic Rumbler makes a single Rumbler instead of 2. It does more damage, it has more health. I don't think those are big selling points for Rumblers, or really problems either. At lower levels, 2 will still kill enemies, and at higher levels, consolidating them and giving them this bonus damage generally won't allow it to kill enemies. So that doesn't, in my experience, make that much of a difference. That's a lot more health, but a lot of the time, I don't think it's so bad to recast Rumblers a lot, because when they die, they leave rubble behind. So I don't know, I just don't feel like this really does anything you want. out of rumblers. But the slam, that radius is really large. The 15-meter slam radius. If that's what you want, that's a large range. I'm going to say D tier. There's an argument you can mount that this makes it worse, which I would say is what F tier is. But you could also mount an argument that this is good at something different. The thing it's good at just isn't like amazing or whatever, which would be C tier. So let's say D tier. Why not? It's a tier list. How are you going to decide it any other way? Cool. Moving on to Banshee. Banshee is an interesting one, of course, because Banshee is a warframe that has a lot of different ways she can be built, and they're often really focused on her abilities. It's kind of hard sometimes to juggle all of Banshee's tech, and the augments largely, spoiler alert, mostly give you even more tech. But some of it I think has good synergy. Sonic Fracture is, like Seeking Shuriken, an augment that lets you remove all armor, and this one does it in an AoE. It pushes enemies away, which is not usually good in Warframe when you want enemies grouped up so you can kill them all. It might not be that bad though. And it does also knock them over. That's also usually not an advantage because it makes it harder to hit their heads. And killing them on the ground is usually not faster than killing them some other way. Still, like Seeking Shuriken, this is a really easy way to get the utility to remove all armor from an enemy. I don't think that taking the action, because it's not a one-handed action, to do Sonic Boom is necessarily more efficient than the other way you would have killed them. So I'm going to say this one is kind of C tier. I just don't think I would pick Banshee for this. If you're playing Banshee. Banshee has other ways to increase damage, ways like Resonance. This is a Sonar augment. Sonar is a pretty powerful damage boosting ability if you can hit the little spots. Maybe with a flamethrower, or you have very good aim, or the weapon is a little inaccurate and you'll eventually hit one. It's a workable ability for increasing damage, and Resonance makes the weak spot kind of echo out. That could be good with range, and it's got good duration. Sonar has good duration. I've used this to great effect. I think it's pretty satisfying to have it just be in the environment and then enemies have that effect. Personally, I also really like how Sonar looks. And so I don't know. I mean, I think this is effective, but it's kind of tied up in, is Sonar just good? You see what I'm saying? So I don't know. I'm going to say B tier for this one. I think a lot of the A tier feeling I'm feeling is just Sonar. Not so much this augment, but it's something I want when I use Sonar, so I'm going to put it in B tier. Savage Silence. Savage Silence is weird. It increases finisher damage. This one has some bugginess. So I couldn't decide how I wanted to talk about the bugginess with this with this tier list. And I kind of feel like overall it's better not to. It's better to try to evaluate it based on how I usually evaluate things in Warframe, what it's clearly intended to do. At the moment, Silence, opening enemies to finishers, doesn't open them to the stealth damage multiplier, at least the last time I checked. But I don't see how it's intended that doesn't open them to stealth multipliers, and this is intended to do that. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So I feel this is nearly impossible to evaluate. If it just increased finisher damage, I would say that similar to Fatal Teleport, I think this is almost pointless because finishers nearly always kill enemies already if they aren't to use a hammer. But if you count that nebulous activity where it does enable the stealth multiplier damage, that's good. That's damage. I don't know. I'm not sure. These are ones where maybe it's cheating, but I'm going to say that I can't think of a way to rate this that's helpful. So go figure. As much as ratings are already not even that helpful. Resonating Quake. This is weird. It kind of changes the ability. Soundquake, normally you channel it and it does this crowd control thing. In an area, it's like they're in an earthquake. Resonating Quake, it doesn't do this. It instead does this. It's kind of a single hit instead of this ongoing one. What I like about this is that it makes Soundquake not really related to duration. So if there was something else you were doing on Banshee where you were dumping duration for some reason, the big reason is manipulating silence to be just like a stun button. A lot of people will do high range, low duration, and then silence wears off really quickly, but it does stagger enemies every time you use it. That's a thing people do if that sounds fun to you. This gives you a pretty big advantage when you do that. Also, 20x damage at the epicenter. yeah, it has damage fall off. And I guess since we're on the wiki, we can just check what that is. Damage fall off, 33% reduced damage at the halfway point. Okay. Anyway, yeah, so it's good damage fall off. My experience using this is that it's a lot of damage fall off. When I say good, I mean it's a lot. That's not, you don't want a lot of damage fall off. It's a good bit of considerable damage fall off. So it doesn't do amazing damage in a huge area, but it's still a lot of damage. If you want that from a Warframe power, on a Warframe that has the ability to remove armor from enemies, I do think Sonic Fracture in this make a good combo. B tier. If you want what this does, it does a fine job. That seems fair to me. And what also seems fair to me is Baruuk. I have a regular on my stream that despises Baruuk, and every time they come up, I'm not entirely sure I understand why, but it makes me laugh every time. Baruuk to me just has a lot of redundant defenses. They're not bad defenses, and the exalted weapon is, well, anyway, we'll get there. Endless Lullaby. This is kind of a category of augment. So this one does two things. It does the thing that there are a few other augments that do, where you lull, and then if you kill an enemy, it re-triggers lull, so you can sleep more enemies, you can keep going. Lull is kind of slow, and again, I'm tempted to point out that it's kind of not ideal on Baruuk, because then your other abilities get their toes stepped on because you're not getting attacked. You can still disarm them. Yeah, but it also gives 50% lull duration. I think that this is one where it's really about how you're playing Baruuk. We have to assume that you're playing in a way that's centered on lull. This is very good if you're centered around lull. 50% duration is already a great, solid prime continuity duration mod, and then you also get more lulls. It's an A tier if you're using this ability. Again, you could argue forever, and there is no right answer to whether it's good to use lull or Baruuk or, any Warframe. Everyone can get the job done, so I'm going to talk about it mostly from the perspective of, within reason, you are using the thing already. We know that. So should you use this? I think you probably should. Reactive Storm. This is great. So Serene Storm is already good damage. It's got a really big hitbox, and the crit is really high. It's got a very good crit stat. The status is sort of bad, but it's kind of fast. So, I mean, my experience is it's fine. This makes Serene Storm's status chance really good, and it adapts to match enemy weaknesses. There's a bunch of complicated mechanics, not that complicated, but we're not going to talk about it here, about what adapting to enemy weaknesses is. All you need to know is it does a pretty good job. It doesn't screw you over adapting to something, but it's actually not what you would want, or it's like something terrible or whatever. It just gives it a bunch of status chance. This is, if I recall, additive status chance. Yeah, the wiki says it's additive too. So between me and the wiki, both not perfect, but two different sources, is probably additive, which is a lot. So that does fix the low status chance. That's what I remember too. So that's great. This weapon was basically only bad because of its status. Again, the catch here is that it's not easy to maintain Serene Storm because you have to lose restraint. We're not necessarily getting into the weeds of whether you can lose restraint, but if you are using Serene Storm, someone in the comments will say, I'm able to always use Serene Storm. For that person, this is an S tier mod. There is no reason not to use this. If you're playing Baruuk, I think. I'm not sure that Baruuk does anything well that doesn't involve this, that this is not the payoff for. But let's say it that way. Very, very good, provided that, again, we're assuming that you're using Baruuk. Chroma. This is a strange one too, because this is a Warframe that is a bit has a bit of a dichotomy. Ability people largely don't think is very good, two really, really good but really simple abilities, and then another ability that people largely don't think is very good. Afterburn for Spectral Scream. Spectral Scream is that breath ability, and then you can swap elements too. This makes it fire a sort of fireball thing. The damage on this is really bad. Why? I'm not sure. For abilities like this, look, the damage isn't complicated. I feel like there's no excuse for these. There are some abilities where I understand you would at least need to playtest to know how the damage would stack up and be reasonable, but this is an ability where it's like, just make it 1,000 damage and it would still be bad, but it would not be insulting. I don't know. This is terrible. Definitely D tier. Also, I guess this is one of the PvE Conclave mods, but what I meant was the ones that relatively recently became PvE to Conclave. Anyway, yeah. F tier though, because this would never actually gain you anything. If Spectral Scream is killing enemies, those are the only levels where this would kill something, and you could just keep, I guess it's energy. I think this is an F tier mod. It just doesn't do enough. And then it's like the augment slot. You don't need every mod slot. And this takes up one, and it doesn't really do anything. I feel like some of the time there's even a discussion to be had here about this making you play worse because you'll deactivate Spectral Scream at the few levels where this will kill enemies, and you should have just kept it active and it would have done more. I don't know. Anyway, Everlasting Ward. Interesting, but has the problem that I said with the stealth mod for Ashe, where I'm not sure that playing around your teammates is that valuable most of the time in Warframe. This is really good if there's a situation where you have a coordinated squad and you need to not be in the same place. I cannot think of such a situation, so it's bad. But we need to give it some credit for that, or it's not useful to say F tier because that never happens. It's like, well, you could run to your squad mates and then run away. And then how much value are you getting out of them being unpredictable NPCs that now have a buff? What are you giving them? So a lot of Elemental Ward's buffs are defensive. Toxin Elemental Ward has a big reload speed buff that could be offensive. The thing about that is that it's not like a damage buff where no matter what they're doing, it's offensively valuable. Reload speed, it really depends on the weapon. It can be an amazing damage buff if you pick a weapon that really takes advantage of it, or something like a bow that has a weird relationship with reload speed, or they have the Soma and they never reload. I guess when they do, it's long, but you get the point. So I don't know. I think that this one is D tier. You can do things with this. I don't think it's worthless. And I guess it does have the appeal that at lower levels, you can walk up to a new player with Heat Elemental Ward and like triple, quadruple, maybe more their health. But I'm not sure that's gaining you much. So yeah, D tier. Vexing Retaliation. This is a pretty interesting one. I'll say right now, I think this is B tier, and the only reason I don't think it's A tier is because I think Vex Armor usually makes you tanky enough already, but staggering enemies, so you usually would take health damage and then they get blast, that makes them less accurate. And at one point this also staggered them. I don't know if it still does that. That might have been blast or that might have been this effect. I forget exactly when I used this, but either way, it makes you more defensive. You know, you're tankier in a way that does interact favorably with your high armor from Vex Armor, and the puncture does too. You know, you get both. Currently, puncture is damage, the enemy just does less damage reduction for you, basically, and then the blast is an accuracy reduction. So yeah, it's going to be very difficult to kill a Chroma with this up. The only reason I don't think the damage reduction that this is providing represents a good rating, but I think the problem is that Vex Armor maybe doesn't really need this. So yeah, maybe B or even C tier, depending on how you look at it. Maybe a C for redundancy. It's average at the job it's trying to do, keeping you alive in the context of how alive you already are, which if you have Vex Armor active is a lot. So go figure. Guided Effigy. You get to move your effigy around. It does a lot of damage to enemies in its path. A lot of damage. 2,000 damage per second. That's a lot. Getting it to do the thing is pretty awkward. This is one where, because it's hardly instant and you do have to micromanage, this one there's a question of how much damage were you doing? And there's probably a category of player where their weapons are not doing this much damage, and this is sick. But I think mostly not. Yeah, I don't know. It's maybe a C tier. There's a question about whether being able to reposition your effigy is good. I think it isn't, because effigy is an extremely energy intensive ability. Effigy does a few really niche, potentially valuable things, like increasing credits from stuff like Prophet Taker, but even then, like, you deploy it for a very short time, and if you don't, it costs so much energy. I don't know. I'm not convinced that's that valuable, but I think certainly for what this is trying to do, it does just fine. I think it's a C tier, but again, just like a lot of these, the ceiling is all over the place. If you're a player who just got access to this from your syndicate or something and you're leveling up, this is probably insane for like a couple dozen hours of your gameplay time until your weapons outpace it, and then it's like, is it worth micromanaging this? So I don't know. Weird. What are you gonna do? Ember. Oh, Ember. Yeah, Ember is in a weird place because a lot of these augments, to save us some time, are weird. Like things I'm not sure. Okay, Fireball that you want to do on Ember. Fireball Frenzy. This lets you buff heat damage onto your weapons, and it can also affect allies. There's 3 different ways to look at this. The first part is it gives your weapons heat damage. These elemental buffing mods have good base values, long durations, generally the ability has a low cost, so the only problem would be if you don't want to build your weapons taking into account that they're going to get that damage added to it. Heat is pretty safe in that regard. It has good damage bonuses against flesh, and it melts some armor if it does a status effect. So having a weapon that just has a single combined element, which is how a lot of people build their weapons, and then you add heat without really thinking about it, I think that's usually good. That's going to be a good thing. You will be in a good place after doing that. But there's a question about whether your allies, you don't know. The argument I usually give with these is that if your allies don't have an intentional build, this usually improves it. So in other words, like if they just have whatever element, this is probably better than what they have. If they don't have corrosive or viral or something built, this is probably better than whatever else they have. But there's the occasion where they had something like cold and then this makes blast and they're usually worse off. So I don't know. These are weird. And then the third part is that this is an Ember augment. Ember comes with a lot of abilities that do a ton of damage, and it's heat damage. So the heat status effect thing, that is unlikely to be... They'll probably just have a heat status effect. So I don't know. I'm going to say this is a B tier. I think if you focus on it for your weapons only, it's a pretty decent damage buff. And it costs very little. It's got a very long duration, good base value. You don't need to build around it much or maintain it very much or pay much energy into it. B. It's a good damage buff, but it's not to be overstated. Immolated Radiance. Okay, so allies in affinity range, huge, get 50% of Immolation's damage reduction, which is variable, widely variable. For Ember, like the max damage reduction is fairly high, so maybe it's okay, but your allies are only getting half. At the low end, that's not really that much damage reduction. I don't know. I don't think this does its job well, and I don't think Ember is good at doing the thing this is trying to do in other ways. Like I don't think Ember is particularly supportive, and then this would be like the cherry on top of some supportive Ember. Fireball Frenzy, D tier. Healing Flame. Fire Blast heals you, depending on immolation level. Again, for you, you can control this. What I like about this augment is that you usually use Fire Blast to dump heat. If you're not familiar with Ember's heat mechanics, basically other abilities increase the gauge, and how fast the gauge increases, something that's a little bit hidden. And Fire Blast reduces the immolation gauge, or whatever it's called, and also reduces the rate at which it fills up, like it makes it cool down more. This means that usually you use Fire Blast when the immolation gauge is high, so it will heal for a lot, right? 50 per enemy hit. I don't know. What I like about this is that it's something you'd probably be doing anyway if you were using Ember's abilities, and then you just heal, probably for a reasonable amount. So I don't know. Kind of maybe B tier. People are going to say, well, you can heal with your operator using the Magus Arcanes. The thing is, you do have to stop killing enemies to do that. This, you just keep going. Healing can still be valuable, even though you can heal for free for pretty much no opportunity cost. For healing to be good, it's got a multitask, and this does. So I don't know. I think this is B tier. Exothermic. Enemies killed under the effects of Inferno can drop energy orbs. Yeah, Exothermic can have a lot of targets, and it's energy hungry. 15% is bad, and if I recall, it's not affected by strength. We'll corroborate with the wiki. It says it isn't either. Again, you can't be sure, but 2 different sources. Yeah, it's fine. My experience with this was good. B tier. I think if you're using Inferno, you probably want to use this. Go figure. Not a bad showing for Ember overall. I do think there are some that just really cleanly fit into her playstyle rotation. And speaking of not that at all, Equinox, this one maybe does. Metamorphosis. So you get a doppelganger, kind of it's a specter that gets to use your mods, The damage output of Spectre is not affected by mods. What they mean by that is the strength. It's not affected by strength. Your Spectre of Equinox gets to use your weapon mods, but that 300% damage is not affected by strength. This is often a good thing because it means you can build range from overextended and not lose the damage. You still get triple your modded weapon damage from a Spectre that can't stagger itself with explosives, or you with explosives, for free, provided that you have a gameplay loop where you're swapping. If you're using this, if there's a build where this belongs, it is phenomenal. I think this is A tier. I would be biased. For me, this has performed extremely well because I play to it, but not every Equinox build is going to want this, of course. Certainly, if you play to its strengths, it does a very good job, and it is affected by duration as well. The only problem with this, the damage, the performance, is absolutely outstanding. The problem is, there are a lot of Equinox quirks that make it really punishing to switch forms. So the versatility of this really isn't there. You need to make a build not around this, but it's got to be a build that really specifically works with this. We'll get back to that in a minute because there's a similar augment for Equinox that plays into it. Common Frenzy. Speaking of building for range, this is another one of those spreading the effect for the remaining duration augments, and it works for Rest or Rage. Both potentially good. Spreading Rest is kind of like spreading a sleep effect, perfectly fine. It does also mean if you do finishers, while it's not efficient to kill one enemy at a time super a lot in Warframe, if you do that, this is a good place to be. It's a good way to live life, to sleep some enemies, and then when you finish your one, nearby enemies also fall asleep. The range of Rest, spreading, could be better. That's the bad thing. It's within 5 meters. That's what I think makes this really bad. The idea is great. If the range was a lot better, to be fair, not just a little better, it would have to be a lot, but this could be fantastic. My experience is this is D tier numerically alone. It's just kind of an unusably small range, but it's really, really good in the situations where it's good. The effect is phenomenal. Again, it's just a matter of where, and unlike Duality, it's really, really difficult to use this, so I'm going to say D tier. Peaceful Provocation. This is one of those ones that I'm going to rate highly, but it's really important to remember my rating system here. This is really good if you want to use it. It's often very bad, but if you make a build around this, it's great. Pacify already makes enemies weaker, they do less damage, and this makes them slower. So that's 2 different ways that it's reducing their damage. They attack less often and for less damage, rather than just attacking for even less damage, which would have a bit of a marginal benefit fall off. That's great. If you charge this up, enemies are virtually incapable of hurting you and all of your allies in potentially a very large radius. To top it all off, Pacify can regenerate energy while you keep it on, because it charges you energy in that weird way where it's like per enemy affected, over time, but per enemy affected. You can use things like Xeneric Energizing Dash with this active and regenerate a ton of energy while you have everything really slowed, and the radius is massive. So that's Pacify. Provoke. I'm mostly not going to say much. Again, this is that problem where I don't really believe that buffing your allies or focusing on buffing your allies is almost ever any good or useful in any way. And there are even cases where it's bad. There are some builds where it might even be undesirable for them to get more strength. So this is only good if you specifically coordinate with allies, which makes Warframe a completely different game. So I don't really see a useful way to rate that. Pacify, Peaceful Provocation, I'm going to say A tier. It makes you and your whole team and the objective immortal, but Pacify is doing some of that work, so it doesn't deserve an S tier. Energy Transfer. So this is the introduction of a special tier for mods that I think on balance shouldn't be augments. I don't think this should be innate. I'm going to rate this as though it's going to stay this way, and we're going to put that aside. But since we're going through all the augments, all the Warframe augments, I'm going to highlight where I think one is a really glaring example of an augment that, does this really need to be an augment? Shouldn't this just be the basic functionality of the ability? Yes, I do think so. This just lets you swap between forms using Mend and Maim. You can keep them active. Why would you even want to do that, you might be asking? I think this is very, very strong. Probably A tier, maybe even S tier, because it enables a really, really awesome playstyle that's very powerful, where while you're charging up Maim, stores damage and then you release it and it just explodes all the enemies, you can be in night form instead of in day form. And night form's abilities are much better at keeping you alive while it charges up. You can use just rest is already pretty good. And while you have Maim active and charging up, the effect when you don't activate Maim isn't very good. Enemies just take a pittance of slash damage and not really relevant, not why you're there. Mend, on the other hand, gives you overshields. Okay, so this is a really powerful defensive effect, and it fits perfectly because you want one passive effect and one active effect, and this lets you take the good passive effect and then the good active effect. I'm not saying Mend activated can never be good, and Maim for its slash can be good if you like walk through low-level enemies and they just die, but usually you want to activate Maim, and then while it's charging up, you'd rather have it be Mend with that passive effect, and this lets you do that. Amazing, and it perfectly fits into some of Equinox's other good augments, like definitely Duality is a perfect fit, and Common Frenzy isn't so bad if you're playing that way either. So good stuff. Yeah, I mean, Equinox is a weird warframe in that you are competing between the abilities and the forms, and the augments having an odd relationship with that. That's complicated, but overall not a bad showing. Excalibur, Surging Dash, an unfortunate combo counter based one. This is one of those nagging things in Warframe where Melee 3.0 added build diversity and didn't really meaningfully reduce the power of melee, in the sense that at normal levels, playing in a normal way, you still kill enemies just fine with it. So there wasn't really much of a negative there, except that it wasn't very thorough. And this is often what happens when things get updated in Warframe. This mod just wasn't really addressed with the advent of melee combo working differently, so the value is way too small. You can increase it with strength, it's just not enough. I've played with this and had a lot of fun because I think it's nice to rack up points. That's the feeling I got. Each enemy you hit, it feels nice to sort of aim a cone, slash dash is in a cone, and then you pinball between them and you get points, sort of, you know? But as for this actually being useful, it's way better to just heavy attack or combo attack during that time. No matter what you would have used the combo for, you're not gaining anything by doing this instead of those, even if you build it for all strength, and if you don't, it's not even really a noticeable benefit. I would say D tier only because F tier is being reserved for mods that kind of anti-do something. This doesn't really do anything. Radiant Finish. Another one of these finisher damage ones. Dude, finishers already kill everything. And again, if they're not, use a hammer. If you use a modded hammer weapon against Steel Path enemies, and you cast Radial Blind without this augment, you would expect them to die. If they're really not, and that matters to you, fine, use this. This is D tier. It doesn't really do anything when you have a good weapon. And if you don't have a good weapon, you probably don't need to do that much damage to those enemies. So I don't know what to tell you. Furious Javelin, on the other hand, this is an interesting one. So as I recall, this is a separate multiplier, and the wiki agrees. Yeah, so this is one of those, like, in the faction damage mods multiplier steps. Every enemy hit giving you 10% damage sounds low, but because there's a lot of javelins and the duration is really good at base, this is a lot of damage. Usually you cast this and your Exalted Blade damage, or whatever you're doing, literally just doubles, because Exalted Blade counts as melee damage for a long time. You don't even have to do it that often. The animation is slow, but if what you need is damage, this is an insane damage buff. I would say, yeah, A tier, assuming you need damage, which, again, some people don't. Chromatic Blade, pretty much the same thing. The only thing that is not absolutely amazing about Excalibur's Exalted, well, that's not true, but one of the only problems is that it doesn't have a lot of status output, and this fixes that and more. This is a huge amount of status, it's affected by strength, and you get to make it purely elemental, which is mostly a benefit. It's not strictly better than it being, slashy or something, but it's good to have a pure corrosive Exalted Blade. It cures what ails the enemies. Yeah, this is fantastic. I would say A tier, and the only reason I wouldn't say S tier is that I feel like Exalted Blade is already really good. Again, it's just in context. I'm not sure how. It wouldn't be good to overstate how much you're gaining by using that. Ooh, Frost. I really like Frost augments. They're all kind of weird, or they have these odd use cases. Freeze Force. So what's a little about cold is part of magnetic. That's all I'm gonna say. Yeah, similarly to the other elemental buffs, the question is, for you, are you okay with building around this? Yeah, if you have corrosive or viral, or you want to make viral, cold is unobtrusive and it's good against alloy armor and shields. Pretty solid. Also pretty solid for your allies, provided they're not using pure electricity or something, then they're getting magnetic, then for the most part this is benefiting them. And like all these elemental buffing mods, the base value is really good and the duration is quite long, so you can get value out of this by just plopping it on without really building into it. You might even have negative stats for duration or something, and this could still be pretty good with relatively little upkeep. A tier, I think cold is a really good place to be for an augment like this. It also has really nothing to do with Frost's kit. It's a pretty unique design space for Frost. Frost isn't doing anything much to make his weapons stronger, so having that option is nice, gives you some more versatility. Ice Wave Impedance. Ooh, all people love this augment. I love this augment. I'm not convinced that this is incredible because you have Snow Globe as well, but it does give you a lot of zone control. This is not just you Ice Wave and then enemies in front of you are slower or whatever, but you could have just killed them. That's not good. And that's why people who say this is not very good say it's not good. But you're thinking about it in too close-minded a way. You can put this somewhere and leave and come back and the enemies are under control even though you're not there. If you do this and like a snow globe on an interception point or something, enemies are going nowhere. Like those enemies are not moving around much, if almost at all. So this can be really powerful. The duration is pretty good. Ice Wave has a nice duration, a range, and this is a good base duration, which combine together well. So you can cover a lot of the map in slow terrain, and this can work on some tankier enemies as well, like certain kinds of bosses, usually the ones that haven't been reworked in a while, but it's still pretty good stuff. I think this is solid. It's a B tier for what it's trying to do. Chilling Globe, super simple, 50% chance to hard CC enemies if they walk in, not affected by strength. The duration is fine, and it is affected by strength. It's whatever. I think snow globes are already pretty defensive. What is valuable about this is that you could leave one somewhere and then enemies will get frozen, and the problem is that not all enemies get frozen, but enemies in a snow globe are already pretty slow. I think this is pretty bad because it doesn't really allow you to do anything new. It just means that you're vaguely safer in a snow globe where you were virtually invulnerable to harm already. I'm going to say D tier. I don't think this is accomplishing anything. Icy Avalanche. A very important note about this is that it's kind of like Iron Skin, this coat of ice. It makes you immune to status effects and self-stagger from explosive weapons if you have any of this. My complaint here is that this is not a lot of damage reduction. Even if you build a ton of strength and range, and you do this on a ton of enemies, like 20 enemies, it's really not that much defense. It's not terrible, and it does affect your allies. Again, there's that questionable value of that, but it's just not that much defense. It's not bad, but it's not great at that. With that benefit alone, I would say this is maybe a C tier if you build around it. Icy Avalanche maybe wants to be built that way already, with some strength perhaps for the armor reduction, and then probably with some range. So that's not so bad. It's not pulling you in a different direction from a way it would already be effective. But yeah, it negates self-stagger. I think this is a B tier one. You can walk around shooting explosives at your feet. Yeah, come on. That's good. But it's okay. It's not incredible. I don't want to overstate it. Gara, ooh, only 2 mending splinters. This is healing. It's a really small amount of healing. Yeah, so every target friendly or not affected by Splinter Storm, the healing is just so low, but it's health regeneration, which is okay. I don't know. It's hard because healing for Warframe abilities can be good if it multitasks. You can always heal by just popping into operator or whatever, but you don't have to do that. You don't have to stop killing stuff when you use this. But it's really slow. There's the question of if this isn't enough healing to keep you alive on its own, and I don't think it is if you're getting hurt, then is there a point? I don't know. I think this is C tier. You can heal other stuff, which is good, but I don't think it's enough healing unless you build around it and affect a lot of targets. So, yeah, I'm going to say C tier. Spectrosiphon, really good when it's good. You can make a lot of energy orbs if you can group enemies up inside it. The energy orb drop chance isn't affected by strength. But yeah, Spectra Rage can be a very large area. The biggest problem with this ability is that Spectra Rage mirrors, draw enemy aggro. At high levels, like often on the Steel Path, they just die. You'll cast it, and it's amazing how quickly it will just break. That is a pretty big problem. You can control the enemies first. You could use one of Gara, or if you infuse Spectrosiphon and Spectra Rage on another Warframe with the Hellman system, you could just add some crowd control and then get like a lot of energy orbs. 50% chance for an enemy. If you have like 10 enemies, that's a lot. But like 6, that's a lot of energy. It at least pays for itself, but it's also a 75 energy ability. I'm going to say this is kind of a C tier one. It's good at what it does if you build around it, if you give it help, and it's not great at what it does, and it's an augment. So yeah, again, I'm maybe being a little harsh, but I'm gonna say C tier. Poor Spectrosiphons. It's still good. It can still be useful. And again, it does have the niche that if enemies are uniquely grouped up, it can be a lot better than other energy generating abilities in that specific situation if you can get a ton of enemies grouped up. The more enemies there are, the better it does. Garuda mods, Dread Ward. You become unkillable for 5 seconds when Dread Mirror kills a target by ripping its life force. So this means not the blood ball that you throw, but the direct cast. Dread Mirror is, if I'm remembering correctly, an execute. Yeah, so a couple details about this. You can still take damage, you just won't drop below 0 health. That can matter for a few things. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like Dread Mirror already defends you pretty well. You have to execute an enemy. Is this affected by duration? I bet it is. It is. Yeah, but you do have to execute an enemy here and there. It can be difficult in a co-op mission to have enemies around that you can execute. Your allies might just kill them really quickly. I think this is okay. There's a question with these mods about the main thing you gain if they're keeping you alive is that you free up mod slots because you don't have to mod to keep yourself alive. But if they're not reliable, then you just die the moment that they're not reliable. And the weakest point of your defense is your defense, I don't know. I think this is C tier. It makes you unkillable, but, Bloodforge. Ooh, my jam, my sauce is here. You reload your weapon when you use bloodletting. What the hell? This is so good. Instant S tier. There are so many weapons that are completely busted if you use this to reload. This reloads weapons so much faster than if you would normally reload some weapons with long reload times. When this does like anything, when this accomplishes basically anything for you, it is insanely powerful. It lets weapons that are supposed to be balanced by not being able to attack all the time, they have a long downtime after their destruction is wrought, completely busted. I think this is an S tier. Some people say this is overreacting, it's an A tier, and those people are correct. This is totally an A tier. Blending Talons. I love the name of this one. Yeah, you do Seeking Talons in like an AoE around you, and then the Talons give you more combo when you hit enemies that have slash. Yeah, this is fine. I think it's mostly a variant way to cast Seeking Talons. I'm not convinced the combo is amazing, but if you do this quickly and there are a lot of enemies around, and your allies don't kill them first, then that's a lot of combo. This is fine. To me, this is really a playstyle focus one, so we have to evaluate it on what you gain for the mod slot rather than, like, do I like this or not? I like the normal way of casting Seeking Talons myself, but that's not a thing about the mod, that's the thing about me. So as much as possible, I'll eliminate that bias. I don't know. I think this is kind of a C tier thing. In the situation where this is good, it's fine, and it's not like terribly hard to use or anything. I do think there are situations where the Seeking Talons being an AoE could benefit you, but I still don't think it's amazing. I think the ceiling and the floor for this are just both not that extreme. So, I don't know. C tier? Perhaps. I reckon. Gauss has one augment, but it's pretty spicy. Yeah, you run into walls, so that's what the impact shockwave thing is, and then you leave behind a vacuum area that sucks in enemies. Yeah, so this has a duration. It creates like a vortex. You can see on the little stats part that I left up because I thought it would occasionally be relevant, 3 seconds. So it's a grouping ability. 8 meters is about on par with what other Warframes get for a lot of grouping abilities. So if you want to group enemies up, this is par for the course on a Warframe that I think is interested in doing that. Yeah, you have to run into a wall. I don't think that's ideal. I think not being able to use this, it might be hard to trigger this when you want it. I'm going to say C tier, but this is a C tier, very unlike that last one where when it's good, this is pretty good. Grouping abilities are very strong, and that's basically what this represents. But a lot of the time, you just won't be able to use it where you want it to be. That's the critical thing. A lot of levels, like normal Warframe missions, there's level geometry everywhere. But is it where you want to suck enemies together? That kind of cuts into the effective meter range, you see? So I think that amounts to about a C tier rating. Still pretty good, though. Just has to be played around. Grendel, oh boy. I can already see how the comments are going to go for these. Hearty Nourishment. When you use Nourish, and one of Nourish's buffs is just a straight toxin damage buff, so it's not hard to find an excuse to use Nourish. It doesn't cost that much energy. You have to have enemies in your stomach, though. You clear status and get status immunity. This is insultingly bad. Grendel's Nourish is already not very generous. You have to jump through more hoops for less of an effect for most of the effects than other Warframes get, or just not a very strong effect. Clearing status effects, it's very rare that that comes up. A lot of the time you're better off addressing the bad thing the status effect did to you rather than getting rid of the status effect. If you do get a slash status effect, you're often better off just healing. Although to be fair, Nourish does heal you. But that's kind of the point I'm trying to make. If you get a magnetic status effect, you want more energy. It kind of makes no never mind. It's too late now, you got the status effect. I don't think clearing status effects is that good. Status immunity can be really good because that's the whole point. That's what you would have rather had. But this is an absurdly short duration. 2 seconds? Really? I'm not even going to talk about range. F tier. This does nothing, and the duration is I'm actually kind of offended that they made the duration that low. That's ignorant of how people feel about Grendel in a way that upsets me. I actually kind of like Grendel, but you get what I'm trying to say. Catapult. This is an Exilis augment. You can put it in the Warframe Exilis slot. It lets you launch your Grendel in the aim direction. If you are using Pulverize, this does give you meaningfully better control and speed while you're in Pulverize. That's perfectly fine. Pulverize does do more damage based on how fast you're moving. So that's good, but I would argue that Pulverize is so bad compared to just killing enemies with your weapons that this is very much a playstyle one. If you like this, don't feel bad about liking it, but it's not powerful because Pulverize isn't powerful. This is a powerful augment to Pulverize, which is a very, very, very weak ability. But I think it's kind of fun. One fun thing you can do with this, go into like Captura for Plains of Eidolon or something where you have infinite energy, spawn some enemies to get in meatball form, and then you can use this to just fly through the environment as a little meatball, and it never runs out. Once you're in meatball form, you just start draining energy if you finish all the enemies in your stomach, and in Captura you have infinite energy, so you can just roll around all over the place and play a Sonic game inside of Warframe. That's very fun. This augment is terrible. I'm going to say D tier, though, because it's very good if you're using Pulverize. And there are corner case situations where, like, maybe you'd want to knock enemies off an objective or something. If there are a lot of enemies and you can't kill them all, when would this happen? Does that mean it's an F tier? I don't know, but that's my evaluation. It's good for an extremely bad ability. Harrow. Oh, Harrow. Harrow is a Warframe that I think it's worth mentioning has a lot of things to do. There's a lot of stuff to manage as Harrow. So these augments may need to struggle against, but will you be maintaining that ability all the time? Or is there a cost to maintaining it? Tribunal. So when you're using Condemn, when you chain enemies, other players count for Penance and Thurible. I have a weird feeling about this one. To me, this might fall into that side tier where I kind of think that should just be how Penance and Thurible work. And I don't know if this really solves the problem. In that sense, that's not very good. But I said that when I think that about a mod, I'm going to try to evaluate it given that it is in the game and that is the state of affairs, rather than evaluating it by stamping my foot and saying, this shouldn't be how it is, so it's an F tier mod. This is a good effect. I think this is like C or B tier or whatever, but personally, I think the bigger topic here is that you shouldn't need to do something for Penance and Thurible. I guess Penance it's fine, but Thurible, you needing to be the one to kill the enemies to get energy is one of Harrow's largest problems. This is a band-aid, as the community often says, and I don't like that. But is this a good effect? Sure, I guess. You can just throw Condemn out a bunch of times. It's got good synergy with Penance because then you have a long Penance, and then your allies heal when they attack enemies that are chained. That's fine. Sure. I don't know. C tier. I'm grumpy about this one, if you can't tell. Warding Thurible. While you're doing the thing with Thurible, while you're swinging it around, charging it up, allies in range get damage reduction. 40% is not incredible, but it also charges Thurible faster when they get hurt. This is hard. It's weird because usually I evaluate things that require you to play with your teammates pretty low, but this one, they don't really have to do anything. They just have to play. You just have to be near them. They might resist that. I don't know. This is a difficult one to evaluate. Yeah, adding charge to Thurible is not bad. The ceiling is a helpful thing to think about. I think this is probably D tier. It's hard to use, and the reward for using it this way isn't that good. It's not terrible, though. Again, it's a combination of factors. The reward just isn't quite good enough. It doesn't really... they have to be in range, and you're having to run after your allies. It really depends on your allies. It's hard. I kind of want to say C tier, but it just depends so much on what is happening to your allies. And there is a question here about, are you really channeling Thurible for that long? I'm not. I don't know. So I'm going to say D tier, but it might deserve a C. And nothing deserves anything. These are subjective. Yeah. Covenant. Yeah, this one is pretty unique. It just makes Covenant not be invulnerability and then headshot damage. It lets you keep the headshot damage. It's invulnerability, and then you can maintain the headshot buff. Yeah, it's just a different playstyle, but it's a ton of damage. If you keep this active, it is one of the strongest buffs in the entire game. I would say it's A tier because of the opportunity cost of not using Covenant for invulnerability anymore, which is a small opportunity cost. You can just kill everything, and then you don't need damage reduction. So go figure, right? Hildryn. 2 augments, both with an interesting relationship with shields. A Balefire Surge. When you fully charge and you get a direct hit with the rockets, a lot of people don't like the rockets, you restore shields to Hildryn, which is, of course, energy. So that makes the rockets kind of refund themselves. It also makes them destroy nullifier bubbles. It gives you extra shields, pish posh, but it lets you destroy nullifier bubbles. If you like playing with Balefires, this legitimizes the strategy. You can stay in Hildryn's 4th ability where you hover and use the rockets, and the only thing that would really stop you, I guess, would be nullifiers, and now you can destroy them. So that's pretty good. I don't think there's much of a payoff for playing that way. So I'm going to say this is C tier. It does make that way of playing work. So it's successful at what it tries to do, but what it tries to do is the definition of average. You pretty much just gain the option to play a different way. You do gain a little bit of shield, so the opportunity cost of a mod slot is offset a little by, yeah, like you get more energy. So it's not bad, but it's not good. I don't think there's much of a benefit to playing that way, but it could be really fun. Blazing a Pillage. So when you activate, when you're, why is this a pillage augment? Enemies affected by Haven will be set. Right, when you pillage, I remember now. So Haven is Hildryn's ability where you fire those shield beams. They can damage enemies, give shields to allies. Enemies that have that on them that you then pillage give you shields, and they also take heat damage. Yeah, it's fine. I wonder if it procs. It does, doesn't it? Yeah. That's also nice. Yeah, Pillage also removes some enemy armor as well, so enemies that were affected by Haven will be left very weak if they had armor. But Haven doesn't... yeah, it's that feels a little unreliable, but it does give you energy, making Pillage kind of free, but yeah, Pillage gives you shields already if you drain from... I guess it makes it really good against Infested. I think this is another C tier one. Like, what it does is not bad, but I'm not convinced that you really want that badly. Meh is almost the first one that I've felt that way about. That one gets a big meh from me. Hydroid's Corroding Barrage. This isn't affected by strength. It just makes the projectiles do corrosive. That's good. If you group enemies up and do this, and you can kind of keep pulling enemies in, maybe with Undertow, maybe a grouping ability that you added with the helmet system, this will continuously greatly reduce their armor in an area. Tempest Barrage doesn't have the most amazing duration. That's not great, but I do think because you can cast it from infinite range and it has an okay radius, in an interception mission, you might just plop it on points to keep them under control, and then those enemies will have very, very low armor as well. That's solid. I think B tier. Tidal Impunity. Ooh. Clears status effects and grants 12 seconds of proc immunity. So some effects like this grant a very short status effect immunity. This one, it's pretty long. I think removing status effects is not that good. When you have a status effect on you, it's generally better to deal with the consequences. The slash effect hurt you. Heal. Don't remove the slash at this point. A magnetic status effect removed your energy. You need energy. There's really no point removing the magnetic now. That's how I generally feel. That being said, not getting them in the first place, okay, that's a bit better. Doesn't mean your armor won't get countered by slash, and there's a few other problematic ones. But it also makes you immune to self-stagger. You can fire explosives at your feet for a good duration. I think Hydroid is in many ways kind of a utility-focused frame, and so having an effect like this with a good duration, it can affect allies. That's a small but nice bonus. That's okay. Of the effects that give you status immunity, I feel like there are examples that are attached to better abilities, but I think it's fair to say this is C tier or maybe even just barely D tier because I don't think Tidal Surge is that good. But yeah, it's a good version of this effect if you're looking for it. If you like shooting explosives at yourself, this is one of the more solid ways to not get staggered by that. Curative Undertow. This can heal allies. The heal is sort of slow. It drains more energy. It's not the end of the world. The heal seems kind of large, but I think it's kind of slow. 1.5 seconds is a long time in Warframe, and 30% health. You can build strength. Are you building strength, though? Corroding Barrage and Hydroid's Pilfering Swarm are not affected by strength. So, I don't know. I'm not sure you are building strength. I feel like there's some opportunity cost here, and I'm going to say C tier. It lets you heal your allies and yourself, if I recall correctly. I guess we'll see what the wiki has to say. Heals self by 10% of max health every 1.5 seconds. What the hell? Okay, well, anyway, I don't know. D tier, that's not very effective. And again, relying on your allies being in the pool, but not absolutely terrible. It is a healing option. Usually heals in Warframe are good if they let you multitask, and this doesn't. So that's a huge strike against it, unless you're killing enemies in Undertow, which is not that efficient a way to do things, but technically that's multitasking. Pilfering Swarm. It's a loot ability and a looter shooter. Sweet. Yeah, something that's irked me about this ability for a long time is it's very difficult to test loot abilities for their very specific mechanics. It seems like, by the wording, enemies have to be held by a tentacle, flying around, or they don't give you more loot. The problem with that is that makes them kind of hard to shoot, and then they maybe can't be affected by other loot abilities, like Khora's Strangledome, although I guess you won't have those both at the same time, that'd be an ally, or like Atlas's Petrify Orgaze. That seems not that great. It isn't affected by strength, so the investment is kind of low, but this is an ability you cast, and then I guess it stays in the area, but it can be a little unreliable. I'm kind of lukewarm on this one. It's hard because it's a loot ability and a looter shooter. That should be big points, right? But it's a little finicky. I'm going to say this is B tier. I think certainly if you're playing Hydroid, I would consider this. I think this is one of the main things Hydroid's got going for him, but I feel that this is the worst example of an ability like this. It's just that loot abilities are pretty valuable. I will say, as an unrelated note, I am still going to say B tier. You can build Tentacle Swarm to do surprisingly good damage, especially to Corpus. That's specific. I don't love when abilities don't work generally, but it's not about what I love. At least as much as possible, I can remove my bias. So I don't know. Something to note. It is a lot of damage that Tentacle Swarm can do if you build it that way. It's kind of a shame this doesn't give you more loot for strength or something, but that would be a lot of loot, to be fair. Who do we got next? Inaros. Oh joy. I have some negative things. Well, some critique. Let's say some critique about these. Killing a blinded enemy with a finisher gets a Sand Shadow. You have a cap of only 3 Sand Shadows, and the chance is not even guaranteed. 75% is silly. Why? It's not even good if you do this. Just make it guaranteed. That wouldn't make it good either. I think if the cap on Sand Shadows was higher, and this was an 100% chance, we're getting there. But as it is, it's already usually not efficient to kill one enemy at a time by doing finishers on them, unless you cannot kill them another way. And this doesn't even always give you any bonus for doing that, let alone a very big one. The chance isn't affected by anything, by the way. I'm going to say D tier. I think this makes very little difference. But certainly having a distraction is not bad. Inaros is just so tanky. It's like, of all the warframes that would benefit from, you get a distraction when you do a finisher or something. I feel like Inaros is very near the bottom of the list of frames that want that. So D tier. Elemental Sandstorm is an augment mod that disappoints me as well. Adding a status effect based on the damage types modded on your weapon is problematic in a few ways. The first one is that Elemental Sandstorm, it drains a ton of energy, and you move really slowly, and it doesn't do very good damage, and it's just bad in a bunch of ways. If it was numerically buffed in like every way, doing status effects would be good. I really don't like this kind of augment because it's so vague. It's the kind of thing where it's like, I have no idea what this does without reading the wiki and then also testing it myself, because who knows what random update changed it or bugged it out, or the wiki is not always correct. But the wiki claims that the effect to get a status effect, the chance to get a status effect, is affected by strength. That's better than nothing. This is D tier mostly because of Sandstorm being really bad. But if it were better, this could quickly get a lot stronger. It's kind of a shame. Negation Swarm. This is very good. This gives Inaros an ability that gives him armor already, the ability to deflect the only thing that his armor wouldn't protect him against, basically, which is like slash status effects and stuff. Cool. It also makes you immune to self-stagger, because immunity to status effects does that in Warframe. Cool. Yeah, I mean, it's very hands-off. You just do a thing you kind of want to do anyway, and you get immunity to one of your few remaining weaknesses. This is fine. The worst thing you can say about this is it just makes Inaros better at something that he's unnecessarily good at, staying alive, rather than really fleshing out his other strengths. But it's so free. I don't think this can be lower than a B tier. It's just like, does it matter in a certain way? If you got hit with, I often use Slash and Magnetic as examples, he would have survived the Slash damage. The Magnetic status effect would have drained energy that he doesn't have much to do with. Doesn't matter, but you can blow yourself up with rockets without getting staggered, so nice. Yeah, I don't know, B tier. It still deserves a good rating. It's good. You should use it if you're playing Inaros most of the time, unless you dislike it or you want space or something else. Yeah, but certainly if you have something you want more, yeah, like take it off. Empowered Quiver. Yes. Really weird one. 2 very, very separate effects. Dashwire arrows, when you're on them, give a critical damage increase. It's modifiable by strength, and it's a pretty large value. That's great. Pretty rare to buff critical damage. I can't really think of... Anyway, solid. And then a totally separate utility, that would be good enough. That's a great damage mod. A nice benefit for Ivara is this is a warframe that can stealth in a few different ways. So yeah, you have to be on a dash wire. Standing still in warframe is not ideal, but you're in the air and you could be invisible. So great. This is a really good Ivara augment because other warframes wouldn't get nearly as much out of this. You can infuse Quiver on other warframes, and they can't use dash wires, which is unfortunate because it'd be fun to try to use this on other stealthy warframes. Anyway, Cloak Arrow also negates status effects. You can blow yourself up with weapons inside of a Cloak Arrow. Sure, I guess. Yeah, that's a little random, but it's still great. Totally A tier. You have to play around this, but again, I'm not docking things based on unless it's really bad to play around them. If it's just particular and you just might not prefer that as a player, that's not a knock against the mod. Definitely an A tier level effect. That's really powerful. Lots of damage. Navigator, such a weird ability. Being able to fly a projectile around. As you hit enemies, you get critical chance up to 50%, and then you get projectile punch through. Yeah, I mean, I don't think flying a projectile around is really efficient at all. So this could give it nearly infinite damage, and it would be very specifically powerful. But yeah, you could do some really weird Eidolon hunting with this. If you are flying around projectiles with Navigator and gaining something, which it's not impossible to do, I think this is a C or B tier benefit because it's a pretty big effectiveness increase to doing that. The question is whether you are doing that. Infiltrate. So you could bypass laser barriers, which exist, I suppose. But look, this gives you 25% movement speed. Did you know that while you cannot sprint during Prowl, it cancels Prowl, you can sprint during Prowl when on a dash wire, and the movement speed is affected by strength. So that's incredible. The augment, do you gain much out of this? I'm going to say this is a C tier because I think a lot of people might be playing Ivara as like a spy specialist, and this is good when you're doing that. I just think it's kind of whatever. It's not incredible. It's fine. I'm going to say C tier. My meme with it, where you sprint really fast on a dash wire, that's an S tier, baby. Concentrated arrow. Your Artemis bow becomes completely different. This is one of those. Rather than a fan of arrows, the fan of arrows can be good because spreading them out means vertically, they often just get a headshot. If you hit the enemy at all, that's good. Only one of them gets a headshot. This one maybe has a higher skill cap in that you have to hit at all, but then if you get a headshot, it does a big explosion. 100 munitions on this, and then range, the explosion's affected by range. Yeah, this is quite powerful. It's just a matter of, I do think it makes it a little bit more all or nothing. You have to get the headshot or it's not. If you get a body shot, this is usually pretty bad. But the headshot is crazy. Ivara can use sleep arrows to put enemies to sleep and set this up. Pretty good. I think this is B tier because you do have to, carefully aim and charge it up, pull the arrow back, and then shoot. And the enemy has to either be slept or you have to have crazy aim, or the enemies will just be dead already from your allies. So, but if you're getting it to work consistently, it's very powerful. So B tier, a pretty big increase in killing potential for Ivara. Not that she particularly needed it. Solid warframe anyway. Khora. Lovely. Accumulating Whipclaw. Interesting one. So it's the damage bonus here when you hit 3 enemies is additive to the one provided by strength, which is confusing. It's not affected by strength. It's almost like this gives you strength, and then it's got a cap. What's the cap? I remember there's a cap. 350%. So this is kind of a way to just get all of the strength for free on your Whipclaw. It's a very efficient way to build a lot of strength, like pseudo strength. So that's very good. For mod slots, this is like S tier territory efficiency. I've never been that convinced that whip-clawing enemies is really so much better than shooting an explosive weapon at them, but it's not bad. You can build for it and it's good. That's effective. And this is a very good augment for that. Probably A tier. This one is going to win a special little award for probably being the most efficient in terms of raw mod value that is analogous to another mod. It basically represents 350% strength on Whipclaw. That is obviously really good. I just think it's not to be overstated. Probably A tier though. Venari Bodyguard. You can be saved by Venari. It then goes on a 150-second cooldown, and killing enemies reduces that cooldown. Is that affected by anything? I don't remember. I don't think it is. They can be increased or decreased by mods, says the wiki, and that's what I remember too. I've used this a lot in the past, kind of an evasive-focused Khora. I'm not sure. I feel like if you kill lots of enemies and it's a horde shooter, it's a little too long, is how I feel. But I think this is close. I think it's a C tier. I think you do pay a mod slot to play this way, and I'm not convinced this is quite enough to save you. It might be. I don't know. It's not that far off, I don't think. But again, this is one of those things where your strongest defense, the weakest point of your defense is what you should consider its strength, and the weakest point is you die too soon consecutively. I don't know. Are you able to not build defenses because you have this? I'm C tier convinced. Pilfering Strangledome. It's a looter shooter, and this gives you more loot. The amount of loot you get is not affected by strength, and accumulating Whipclaw is also a mod that is very efficient if you don't build strength. Good. GG. Sweet. Enemies do have to be held in the Strangledome. This is not ideal. It can make them a little bit awkward to kill. Hitting enemies with Whipclaw in the Strangledome is pretty good. Actually, by the way, my memory is that, so if you Whipclaw a Strangledome, it hits the enemies in the Strangledome. That doesn't activate this. You need to hit 3 enemies with Whipclaw's radius. You can't use Strangledome for that. So that's a non-bow is all. It just doesn't make it better. But it's not anti-synergy. Yeah, and these 2 augments both reward you for not building a bunch of strength. That's good. And then Entangle, you could not build a bunch of strength, and then only Venari is suffering for not having the strength. It's not a bad way to live life. Yeah, I think this is B tier, maybe even A tier for the context of Khora's loadout. I've been trying not to give that too much credit, so I'll just mention it. If you haven't picked up by now, this isn't really a video about tier lists. It's about how tiers are just arbitrary numbers, letters that we assign to things, and Limbo is the next one we're going to talk about. Rifthaven. The only problem with this is that allies are banished, which will probably annoy them. If you build Banish or Limbo for full negative duration, they're banished for a very short time. So if you're not a troll and you build strength and negative duration, this has almost no negative effect. By the time your allies notice that they're not doing damage to enemies because you put them in the rift plane, your negative duration will get them out. And you can backflip to get out. But yeah, I mean, the heal is pretty solid. You could just go boop and heal them to like 75% with a bunch of strength. Good. Not amazing. I'm not really sure how to evaluate this sort of trolling thing. It's not really trolling if you use it the way I'm describing. I'm going to say B tier. There are not a lot of abilities that heal your allies in a way that is very effective. So yeah, this is a good among those. I'm not convinced that's that great, but I do think that keeping your allies alive is better than trying to interact with them to do some kind of damage combo. So certainly if you're going to think about, using abilities for your allies, this is the way I would think about that. Rift Torrent. You do more damage for each enemy affected by Rift Surge while in the Rift. Yeah, big range Cataclysm, and then you do this, and you do an insane amount of increased damage. The question is, do you need to? Because the enemies can just be paused, frozen, and you have all the time in the world to kill them. It's a lot more damage. If you need that, it's probably B tier. You do need to build around it, build this augment, and then have a large range, pretty good duration, and then also good strength rift. It needs well-rounded, is putting it politely, mods. Kind of a little of everything to be good. In exchange, you get a lot of damage, probably more damage than you need. In fact, I would say me saying this is like a B tier as an evaluation is probably more accounting for the fact that it's more damage than you would ever need, rather than that it's like not, it's damage, but it's not that much damage. I'm going to say B tier. Cataclysmic Continuum. The duration of Cataclysm is increased by 1 second for each enemy killed. What I remember is that there's a catch. So I'm going to read the wiki description. The reduction of Cataclysm's radius. The added seconds do not increase the Cataclysm's size, nor do they stop it from shrinking. The increased duration does decrease the shrinking speed. Right, that's the catch. You can't exactly keep a Cataclysm going forever with this because it still gets smaller. So I'm not sure. This can make a very long duration Cataclysm. You could build a huge amount of range and a lot of duration to make it shrink slowly, and then a little strength, Rift Torrent, and then this. And the duration bonus increase is not affected by duration. And then you can stay in there and fight for a long time, probably a really long time. That might not be bad. You do that on objective, you also pause, you have a long duration pausing effect. That seems solid, but not incredible. I think the augment itself is a C, and it might be lower if it weren't for the fact that I think Limbo does have a pretty complete playstyle centered on this. So I'm going to say a C, but it's not to understate that line of play. It seems perfectly reasonable. Oh boy, Loki. Ooh, I'm going to have a field day with this one, baby. Savior Decoy. You can hide your decoy, you know, really up high on a tile set somewhere, and then it dies and you teleport to it. Is Loki dying though? I feel like the only thing Loki does is not die. You're invisible and you can disarm enemies. I don't know. Decoys are not particularly tanky. I do think it's really satisfying when it works. In the Void, you can often go in those sewers or in the hidden rooms, put a decoy there, and they've got a good duration. And then for a little while, if you die, you just boop and go back. Do people do this at all? Maybe on a long survival, it's like insurance. I don't think this is very good. I'm going to say D tier, but in the very narrow use case where this is good, I don't know. I think this is kind of fun. If you are playing Loki like melee and not in stealth or something, this might be fun. You might have a lot of fun doing this. I think the best thing you can say about this is that when you teleport to where the decoy was hidden, you're there. So you can cast decoy again. Now the revive has a cooldown. It's 60 seconds. So the decoy won't save you for a minute. After it saves you, you get a little debuff, but you can replace the decoy. But the decoy's duration is not going to be that much longer than 60 seconds. I don't know. Anyway, it's D tier. It's not good. Hushed invisibility. This makes all your weapons silent while you're invisible. I think this is F tier. It doesn't do anything. There are good weapons that are silent, and they don't really. The weapon is not really given a power tax for being silent. Even the weapons that you might want to use that are not just silent for free have the weapon excellence slot so they can be made silent. I just don't understand and even after all of that, what is the benefit of them being silent almost all of the time? It just doesn't do anything almost all of the time. There are some players that love this because they play around it and are playing stealthily. That's cool. It's not a bad option to have exist. At the very least, it could be a Warframe excellence mod. Yeah, for actual power, it doesn't do anything. It's definitely F tier. But it's utility that can exist in the game. I don't see why not. What's happening here? There's a weird... Oh, the wiki is upset about the state of this page. Safeguard switch, which looks weirdly different for some reason. What's going on? This lets you teleport, swap with a target, and then they become invulnerable. When you're defending an operative in like a sortie defense or something, and the defense target is a unit that you can swap with, this is pretty good. You can build max duration and then just swap with them every 18 seconds, and they're just unkillable. Yeah, in that niche, this is incredible. This trivializes that situation if you need it trivialized. I'm not sure you do, but that's pretty specific. But when that's good, it is pretty good. I'm gonna say B tier. The duration is kind of bad, but it's not terrible, and it's a very absolute form of defense for the operative. It does work properly on Loki's own decoy. I just wanted to see what the wiki was saying does work about. I was like, I'm pretty sure I know. It's the decoy. Irradiating disarm. Okay, there's also more. The wiki is being funny now. Yeah, this makes radial disarm do radiation status effect. It is a radiation status effect, so it affects, condition overload or what have you. Fine. I'm not sure it makes that much of a difference though, and a lot of the time this is worse in the sense that disarmed enemies now can only melee. They'll just run toward usually the same location where they'll melee an ally or something. And this makes them not do that. Instead, they just kind of flash mob and attack each other. That's often worse. It's not terrible, though. It feels good. I had some fun with this in my early time playing Warframe. It probably deserves a D tier. I don't think this makes it just worse, but it makes it different in a way that I do think is usually not better. It's like the resulting effect is not bad. The big saving grace for this that makes me not put it in F tier for making the ability like on balance worse, but it is different, is that I don't really think Loki needs the mod slot that this is going in for literally any other mod. So why not? That's my snarky Loki bit. Mag. Oh, Mag. Some interesting augments. Greedy Pull. Pull has a very large range. It's like 70 meters, I think, if you build full. It's like something, it's very, very large. In the open world, you can be in the air a lot, just really mobile, maybe bullet jumping really high, maybe just straight up flying. You helmet this onto like Zephyr or someone, and this will let you open up pickups, like explode stuff in the open world, and suck in from a gigantic radius around you. That's a kind of specific use case, but when you would even care at all about using a mod that sucks in stuff, this is very, very good at it. I'm going to say B tier. The ceiling is low, but it is very good at its job. Its job is just not to be overstated. Magnetic discharge, fantastic. I'm just gonna A tier immediately. 45% magnetize range. That's all you need to say. Magnetize is very good. It makes enemies virtually helpless. It groups them together. It makes your shots do woogity woogity and kill them. You can look up a million YouTube videos about that. We all know. And this gives it a lot more range, which is something it wants. It's also a new maximum range because it, use only so many range mods, but then this is a new one. It's another stretch for magnetize. That's all you need. I don't think detonating it is really that big a deal, but that's not even that bad. Totally A tier. Arguably S tier. I just think magnetize is, it's not bad, but it's a lot less good in narrow environments, like narrow corridors, and Warframe has a lot of those. So I'm going to say A tier. Mostly for magnetize. It's just an extra stretch for magnetize. That's great. Counterpulse. This jams enemy weapons, and robotics can't move. It stuns basically anything that isn't like an infested or like a melee. Anyway, it stuns most enemies when you use polarize. The duration is really short. It is affected by duration, but the duration is quite short. A lot of the time, if you use Crush instead, enemies are CC'd for the same-ish amount of time unless you've built a lot of duration, and even then it's not that long. Polarize is not a great ability. It reduces a set amount of armor, so at higher enemy levels it's not an effective measure against armor, and it gives you shields, but not overshields. Crush does give you overshields, so I think a lot of the time this is asking too much to be not enough better than just casting Crush with, good stats for Crush. The other nail in the coffin is that for this, you'd want to build duration. For Magnetize, you'd want to build range, and something that makes Crush give you more overshields would be affecting more targets, which is range. So, meh. I'm going to say this is C tier. It's not terrible. It's an option that you might want on Mag, and certainly at medium levels, Polarize can be pretty okay. So yeah, I'm not gonna say it's D tier. It's CC. Go figure. Fracture and Crush. People that you crush that don't die lose armor and can't move for a while. Already a pretty favorable comparison to Counterpulse. If you want the CC and you bring like natural talent because Crush has a long casting time, yeah, that's a good armor reduction. The duration is good if you build around it. Not amazing, but good. It's okay. I think B tier. If Counterpulse is C, this is definitely up to a B. That being said, I do think the thing about armor is that since it has diminishing returns, the more you get, the less damage reduction. Reducing half of an enemy's armor, the half that's left provides a very significant amount of damage reduction. So I wouldn't want to overstate it, but I'm going to say B. Mag has some interesting augments, some good stuff. Not bad options. Mesa has some weird augments. Ballistic Bullseye. I wish that Ballistic Battery didn't have a damage cap. This makes the shot have 100% status chance. Nearly completely inconsequential. I'm going to say F tier. I wouldn't use Ballistic Battery, let alone this. Muzzle Flash. I just feel Ballistic Battery makes no difference. Don't mean to be dismissive, except for the ways in which I mean to be dismissive. After Shooting Gallery gets 6 assists, Mesa's next shot blinds enemies within 12 meters. Yes, after 6 assists with Shooting Gallery. So it goes to another ally. Can you get the assists? I actually don't know that off the top of my head. When an ally buff by Shooting Gallery, so probably they have to do it. Yeah, I mean, the blind radius is really good. This is kind of like getting a bullet that fires an Excalibur radial blind at enemies. That's fine. Not having control of when it happens is pretty bad. I don't know. A lot of six assists is not a lot, and there's no cooldown. My experience with this wasn't good. That's what I'm avoiding saying here. I think it's probably fine, maybe a C tier. I'm not sure Mesa needs this though, because staggering shield. Yeah, you reflect bullets and they can now stagger enemies. This is extremely good against heavy gunners because they have to ramp their weapon up. With this, they can't. They're gonna ramp it up and get stopped in the middle. This does make Mesa, who was already pretty good at surviving bullets, even better at surviving getting shot, but like it's really good at that. It's very, very good at that. It's pretty bad against enemies like bombards, but there are some enemies like heavy gunners that can do a lot of sustained damage against whom this is very good. The question about this is whether you really need it. I'm going to say B tier. And Mesa's Waltz, an Exilus mod. You can put this in the Warframe Exilus slot. It lets you move while using Peacemaker. The thing about this is Peacemaker, as you shoot, gets a smaller reticle. You can build range to make it not get smaller. You might be doing that, you might not. But if you just activate Peacemaker and then turn it off, the reticle resets. And Peacemaker does, you know, a ton of damage. So a lot of the time, you can just activate it and kill everything and then turn it off because nothing is alive. I don't really need to keep walking with it. That being said, this can be a very different feeling. As it's an Exilus mod, there's not like a huge opportunity cost here. So yeah, I mean, it's fine. I don't really know. This is one of those where it's hard to say that there's really a benefit. It just makes the ability work differently. And I don't think that the new way it works is almost in any way better, except if you're shooting an enemy with a lot of health and they go out of your line of sight. This then quickly becomes pretty good, and you can like roll, if I recall, while doing it, which makes you move fairly fast. You can't affect the movement speed reduction, but you can still roll pretty quickly. So that's good. I'm going to say C tier. I think that's okay utility. Not for nothing, you can use Peacemaker the way I described. Just use it, stand your ground, kill everything, and turn it off. And then the reticle doesn't get really small or whatever. You can still do that if you have this equipped. So I don't know. I think it's a C tier. In the situation where it's like objectively more powerful than not having it, it's just not a huge deal. Like you could just deactivate Peacemaker and move, but it's still nice to have. And there's so little cost. So I think it earns a C. C is good. Again, I don't think toxic, grade school C. C is good. It's, it does what it does. Mirage, Hall of Malevolence. If I remember correctly, this is a weird relationship with strength. It's like it's additive with strength or something. Let's see what the wiki says. Applied multiplicatively to their other damage and is not affected by strength. That's not clear. Maybe it's just 50% damage on top of... Anyway, yeah, as you kill enemies. Your doppelgangers, it depends. With Mirage, we all know you can use a weapon that, isn't a gun that shoots one enemy really precisely, and then your doppelgangers will do damage. This adds to that. It's pretty effortless, and Hall of Mirrors has a pretty good duration. So I feel like this is pretty solid. My experience with this has been good. The only reason I'm having trouble just saying, oh, A tier or whatever, is because... Mirage is good at doing this without this augment. Your doppelgangers do significant damage without this augment because they do status effects without this augment. And a lot of the time that's really effective. So I don't know. I'm going to say B tier, but it's not a bad effect. Explosive Ledgermane. Super weird ability, super weird augment. Sleight of hand booby traps items, consumables, lockers, very odd ability. Let's just focus on this effect because this is mostly new. It turns ammo and orbs, health orbs, energy orbs, into mines that explode and have good status chance, maximum status chance. There's just not going to be that many stacks of a status. Yeah, so this is a unique play style in that the mines have a duration, which is not... 60 seconds. It doesn't know at lower level. Right, okay. Yeah, a minute. It's a shame it's not longer. If I recall, it's not affected by duration. What does the wiki say? It agrees, so it's probably not. Yeah, it lets you harm enemies that you're not near. That's good. The damage, 500 is not a lot. The radius is moddable and good, but I don't remember what it is. It's not amazing. It's not bad. Explosion triggering radius is not affected. What's the radius? Anyway, it must be part of the main ability. It's okay. You've probably seen people use this in things like Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, where there are a ton of enemies, or in a survival or a defense, where you know enemies will come through a set area frequently. Yeah, I think this is pretty good. You often do kill enemies with it, surprisingly. There's just a lot of mines a lot of the time. I do think you need to probably bring weapons that aren't going to need the ammo, so that's a consideration. But yeah, when this is good, there are situations, there are a few types of missions in Warframe that are not uncommon, where this literally kills everything. I'm going to say this is B tier though, because you do need to be in those situations, and when you're not, it's really bad. Like this hardly does anything. You have very little control over where the mines are, except that they're where enemies were, which hopefully means that's where enemies will be. But if you're not doing a mission where you stay mostly in one place, this doesn't really work. So go figure. Another small note about this is it can sometimes be better to activate it in the midst of enemies being around loot, rather than activating it preemptively, and then enemies walk through, get a cold status effect, and then they don't walk much for, something like that. I think it's often better to wait for the enemies to be in the midst of a bunch of loot and then like pull the trigger, rather than setting them up as mines, using them as mines, really. But that's just my experience. I guess it's much the same. Total Eclipse. This makes Mirage give the benefit of Eclipse to allies. This is my least favorite ability in the entire game, because it's unreliable. It gets a ton of credit. People talk about how great it is, and it isn't in practice, because the big number, Unga Bunga, you can't have it be light or dark when you want it to be. Sometimes you can, but in Warframe overall, a lot of the time, you can't just know where it counts as dark and where it counts as light. That's a huge problem for Eclipse. This doesn't address that in any way. People always say, well, why not have it, toggle or something? Mirage has other abilities that make light. I don't see why it's so hard to just have those abilities make an area of guaranteed light and an area of guaranteed dark. And we still get the interesting light and dark mechanic, but you can control it. You can play it. I don't know. So to me, this is just kind of disqualified because Eclipse is random. It's like an ability that when you click it, sometimes it just turns off and you don't really get to know when, unless you stay still at a location you may not desire to stay still in. If you're going to complain that there are some weird ways, like an ephemera or something, to make it give you light all the time, I want you to note that the patch notes history has pretty clearly indicated that our developers have been taking out ways to control it. I don't know why. That's maddening. Having it be some obscure way like an ephemera is not ideal. I don't want it to be that. I want it to be a legitimate game mechanic way. But the idea that they don't want you to have control over it is infuriating to me. I can't say anything positive about this. I'm sorry. Giving the benefit to your allies in a good radius is fine. But the benefits of Eclipse are random. There are only 2, but they're random. So I don't know. I don't have anything to say that will make anyone happy. So let's just move on, shall we? We have Nekros. Ooh, some of my favorite augments. Soul Survivor. This lets you revive things instantly from range. It consumes Nekros' energy, all of his energy, but there's a way to get a lot of energy back with Nekros using Desecrate and Despoil, so I don't think that's a big deal. If you view this as being the ability to just instantaneously revive things from range, it's pretty good. If you're using a companion like a Smita to get more loot, and it goes down, you can just, nope, it's back up from like pretty much wherever you want. That is very, very valuable. It's just really convenient too. I don't think convenience should be underestimated. It's a game you play for fun. A tier. This is phenomenal. I don't think you should care about the health it revives them with though. The whole point of this is that you don't need to worry about people going down. So who cares how much health they have? I don't know. Creeping Terrify. Terrify is really bad. It reduces enemy armor, but by a very small amount. It's affected by strength, but again, the base amount is just really small. And it makes enemies run away from you, which is really bad. We consider abilities that group enemies together good because they help you kill enemies faster with AoE damage or melee attacks, and this does the opposite. Terrify's Augment Creeping Terrify here makes enemies run away from you, which is bad. It makes a bad part of the ability less bad. that's still bad. You shouldn't use this. I guess the augment could have like a C or something. It does reduce their speed by a lot. If there's some other reason you need to reduce enemy speed, I guess that's good. This is a big slow. So maybe that's like a B. But in context of Terrify, this is definitely like a D or an F. Don't cast Terrify. Despoil. Desecrate costs health instead of energy. Desecrating an enemy makes a health orb, which pays for the cost. And Nekros' passive heals you when enemies die near you. So this makes Desecrate pretty much completely free. That being said, there is a question about whether it matters if it costs energy. Is this worth the slot in the sense that you could just have Equilibrium and then the health orbs will give you pretty much unlimited energy anyway? Does it matter? And then this is endangering you because you get less health to offset, if things attack you. I don't know. I've been using this for a long time and I really like it, but it's not like Desecrate is bad without it. Personally, I think this is a favorable part of Nekros's energy economy because it makes Desecrate literally always on. I would rather that this occasionally kills me because I needed the healing and this made me pay instead, rather than that I occasionally turn off Desecrate because I run out of energy. Those are the same thing. And provided that things are going well and I heal myself, that's good. Desecrate, I run out of energy. I can't always control that easily. If there's an energy leech Eximus or something, but me running out of health, I can always heal myself more. So I feel like that's a favorable trade for a mod slot. Yeah, maybe it still only earns a B though. Desecrate is phenomenal, of course. Shield of Shadows. You get a layer of damage reduction, different from armor that would affect shields and stuff for your shadows. You need to have a lot of them and maybe a little strength to cap it at some good cap. It's like 90% or 85 or something. I don't remember. It might be 95%. It doesn't really matter, but since we're here, the wiki says 90%. Nice. I do think it's important to contextualize, though. I mean, you could have good armor already and then run like adaptation. Is this that different? You have to get hit repeatedly, whereas with this, you need to maintain the shadows. Some people find maintaining the shadows really annoying. Yeah, it's a choice. As a layer of damage reduction, it's good. I mean, the way I would think of it that way is like, they're different, but what would I rate adaptation? A? Okay, it's an A. I suppose. Anyway, very good stuff. A nice solid layer of separate damage reduction. Nezha. Some really interesting augments. Pyroclastic Flow. This lets you store up damage from Firewalker. 150% is kind of an unhelpful number that's hard to conceptualize. Yeah, it can be a lot. If you run circles around an objective, that's a good way to defend it. It's a weird but perfectly effective playstyle. And then you store up a lot of damage. There's no limit on what you can store. You kick it out and you get this line of fire that does that damage every second for a little while. Good stuff. It can store up a ton of damage, and then if enemies are grouped up or you group them up, or they're in a hallway like Warframe's many corridors and you run through that corridor, they'll be stuck in the heat status effect that will reduce their armor, and then you can swing by, kick into them, and do 5,000 damage per second for a while, and they all die. It could be way more than that. Yeah, it's good. Really playstyle focused though, just like with Nezha overall. I'm not going to docket anything for you needing to play kind of weird because you have to play Nezha kind of weird. So assuming we're already playing Nezha, I don't think that's an additional strain, really. Yeah, this is really solid. I would say B tier. It is still only damage. Like, you could have just shot them and killed them. This is probably more damage than you would have been able to do, but it is a little finicky, and the cast time's not amazing. You do have to kind of like awkwardly kick. If it was more fluid or you didn't have to do an animation, that'd be incredible. I would say that's probably an A. But Reaping Chakram. Each enemy hit increases the damage, and then they drop health orbs. The damage, I don't know that the damage of Blazing Chakram is really meaningful, but dropping a shower of health orbs, and it already makes them have a chance to drop energy orbs. Cool. I think that's nice. Solid. You can get a ton of orbs, manipulate the mods. They give you benefits when you get health and energy orbs. Yeah, it seems fine. I think it's a good utility option for Nezha, who has some serious utility to bring to the table. I think Reaping Chakram is useful anyway, so this is a nice boost. I'm not sure there's a ton here. Health orbs maybe don't do a ton. I think it's a C tier. It's fine. I feel like this is a good ability anyway, which is what's helping it. But I'm not sure it's doing anything that's all that valuable. Safeguard is, though, you can cast Warding Halo on allies to make them really hard to kill. This is a great kind of thing to affect your allies and your beast companions or moas or hounds with, because it's pretty static. You just do it and then they are more survivable for a while. You see them without a hula hoop, you give them a new one. Good stuff. Yeah, totally. Probably A tier, mostly for the benefit of keeping your companion alive more. So again, you can have something like a Smita, or if you angle right, you can do your Sentinel and give it a very meaningful damage reduction increase. It will stay alive a lot better than it would have otherwise. I'm not going to comment on Controlled Slide. My philosophy on, I mean, I'll comment on it, but I'm not going to rate it or anything, as much as that's already meaningless. There are like 47 Warframes. You could just play a different Warframe if you didn't want the slidey passive. To me, this seems a little, I don't know. Like, there's something for everyone. That's the point of having 47 Warframes. Do you really need to disable Nezha's passive? But I guess if you absolutely love the abilities to tiers, this gives you, you know, Power Drift in the Exilus slot, and you don't have to slide around. So it's fine. I don't know. I have kind of an ideological, isn't it okay for you to not like one Warframe? But I guess there's no negative here. But I'm not going to rate it. I don't see a meaningful way to rate it. Down to Nidus, who has some really weird augments. A lot of them really weirdly change his passive stacks in some way. This one is for the passive. You can accumulate more stacks, but Undying has a cooldown. Does Undying normally have a cooldown? It doesn't, right? I'm only thinking that because I'm noticing this cooldown part. I only remembered this augment as giving you more stacks. I don't really think you need it. I don't know. But yeah, it lets you store up way more stacks. Does this make you build damage? It does. So that's really the real reason then. Yeah. If you wanted to progress damage more, that's solid. Nidus can do really good damage with Virulence. Sure. I don't see why not. Another way that you can do damage with Nidus that's pretty interesting. I hadn't thought about this augment this way before. So you use Ravenous, the thing that makes the infested ground, and then you get maggots everywhere. And then if you cast it again, do you cast it again? I think it's you cast it again, or you can pop them with Virulence. They can do really good damage if you set it up that way. And then you get a bunch of stacks, so it snowballs if you just keep casting it. I think I usually just cast Ravenous over and over again when I do it. That doing more damage sounds good. The damage is pretty good against groups of it. That's cool. Okay, yeah, like, I would guess that used that way, it's probably B tier in value. Again, there's a question about, like, is it really that much more powerful to kill them that way instead of with your weapons? No, but is it maybe a little more powerful? Yeah, maybe. For the survivability increase, this seems kind of bad. I feel like that's not, I wouldn't use it for that reason. And that's a trade-off. So let's say B tier. Teaming Virulence, great augment. Hitting 4 enemies, you get a bunch of crit chance. Good duration, good base value, affected by strength. Nidus even has innate base strength, so that affects that as well. Hitting 4 enemies is already what you want to do, and Nidus has Larva to group them together. There's really no lose here. A tier, maybe even S tier. This is such a phenomenal buff. It only affects primaries. That's not a big deal. A or S tier for sure. Larva Burst. You can reactivate Larva to do damage. The flat amount of damage is not very high. Its stacking is fine if there are a lot of enemies in it. I just feel like if enemies are grouped together in Larva, you can do 1,000 horrible things to them. Do you really need this? I'm going to say C tier. I do think 300 toxin damage is less than, like, armored enemies are going to survive this at meaningful levels. So I don't know. The radius is small. It's only going to hurt enemies in the larva, realistically. Being able to reactivate larva just quickly, nice utility. I still think it's kind of C tier. You can't recast larva while active. That might sort of matter. I think that's kind of a preference thing. You could just have not amazing duration. Insatiable. You get a 60% chance that isn't affected by mods to generate an additional mutation stack whenever you get one when you're standing on Ravenous. Yeah, cool, good. I don't see why you would need to not stand on Ravenous in particular. You could just cast a new one with the extra stacks this gives you. Good stuff. Not incredible. Needing to be in one location for it's not incredible. I still think that's B tier. It's solid. I don't think Nidus has that much difficulty building stacks when there are enemies around anyway, though. So this helps. You definitely get more stacks. But is it that big a difference? I don't know. Nova. Oh, Nova. Neutron Star and Molecular Fission do something pretty similar. They both kind of solve, or they're solutions to the problem. of Nova using null star particles for damage reduction. They give you damage reduction if you have them, but then they'll fly away. You can do negative range. They won't fly away until enemies are close, but you can't recast null star by default. Both molecular fission and neutron star, for me, are going to go in the category of mods that you should just be able to recast null star. And they have, well, this has another benefit, but it's not very good. If you recast it, you do an explosion. 8 meters, moddable, that's not so bad. The damage is okay. Is it per particle? That's actually sort of vaguely interesting. I remember using this for damage in the past, but I didn't. Anyway, it still wouldn't be an insane amount of damage, but that might be vaguely relevant. Yeah, it mostly refreshes null star. In the context of needing to do that, yeah, this is good. This is a good way to do it. I think molecular fission is usually better, and they are very directly comparable. We should probably look at the comparable molecular fission right after this. This is fine. I would say maybe C tier. And again, like negative F tier for being kind of a band-aid mod that should probably just be an 8. Why can't you just recast null star? I don't know. There's a lot of abilities like this. Molecular fission, when you kill an enemy that's primed with molecular prime, you get a null star charge, and you get another one if you rank it up all the way. You can leave it at rank 0 and get 1.25 charges, 1 and a 25% chance for another, when you kill an enemy as well. If you wanted to save mod capacity, you always get 1. I think this is a better solution most of the time. I would say in the context of needing to do this, this makes null star pretty easy to maintain, probably A tier, in that it really enables like mostly free damage reduction for Nova. Sure, I'm not sure you really need it. Maybe B tier, because you do need to cast molecular prime, and if you're casting molecular prime, the enemies are slow. Let's say B tier, but again, like with neutron star, I don't think this should need to exist. You should just be able to refresh null star and abilities like it. I don't know, but maybe it's an interesting gameplay loop to some. Antimatter absorb. So your antimatter drop gets a field around it that sucks in. It's basically magnetized, but it gets absorbed into the drop. I find it challenging to keep this in front of me, to absorb fire for a long time. You can, round a corner, there are a bunch of enemies you get shot at, and you cast this as a quick bullet shield, and you kind of run forward with it. That feels like something that isn't really that relevant in Warframe. It sounds like in a different shooter, that would be really good. I don't think it's that good, and in my experience, it's not that good in Warframe. I don't know. I think C or maybe even D tier. I think you are often better off just using antimatter drop straightforwardly. I guess this doesn't hurt. It's probably C tier. Yeah. A good amount of the time, this does at least address the issue where when you would use antimatter drop to kill a bunch of enemies, you generally put it out, you're looking at the enemies, they're in front of you, shooting you, and then you shoot your antimatter drop to charge it up, and then it kills them all. I guess this prevents damage while you do that. That's fine. Yeah, I like C tier. I'm not convinced antimatter drop is that great. Escape velocity. Not affected by strength. It's an Excellus mod, and the speed boost is pretty big. I don't see why you wouldn't use this. A tier. Really, really good movement ability is now an even better movement ability. Something cool about this too is generally wormhole is best when it's this big straight distance you can see, so you can see where you're going. And then for the little tight corners and stuff where you wouldn't as easily be able to wormhole unless you're a speedrunner, this makes you really fast. Fantastic. A, maybe even S tier. This is kind of the first thing we've gotten to that it's like, why would you not use this? This is, you might want something else in the weapon axle slot. That's fine. But this is really, really good for like kind of nothing. There's sort of no opportunity cost here. Good stuff. Onyx. Mind Freak is weird. This I did a video on this, and the thing I have to say about Mind Freak is that you're thinking about like 500% more damage, and does it multiply separately, and blah blah blah. And the thing I want you to focus on instead is it worth casting Mind Control? I don't think so. I think it's a C. Enemies are, without further help besides this augment, not doing meaningful damage to other high-level enemies. And for me, that's kind of enough. It is a lot more damage, but the question is it like a good amount of damage or enough damage? And the answer, in my actually a lot of experience playing with this augment, is no, it's not. So D, mind control is not good, and this doesn't make it better enough to accomplish anything by itself at most levels. But it is a very large damage increase, and if you do some other very weird things, it can actually amount to something. It's not enough on its own. D tier. Pacifying bolts. Affected enemies are confused. This has always kind of confused me. It doesn't really do anything. Psychic bolts makes enemies radiation, so they're confused, which means they're generally attacking each other. They also lose all their defenses. Psychic bolts is great. This I don't feel like does anything. Let's see what the wiki says. Is there anything sometimes that's interesting? The wiki even snarkily points out that the base duration of Psychic Bolts is 11 seconds, and this is affected by duration, so it would always be less time. Yeah, I feel like this doesn't do anything. I'm going to say not F tier, but D tier, only because I'm sure there's like some situation where they don't do something they otherwise would have, and Psychic Bolts is a very good ability, so D tier. I would not use that augment. Chaos Sphere, another really weird one, like all of Nyx's augments. They all kind of do something that maybe would be good, but there's something about the ability innately that makes them like, I don't know what to say about this. Yeah, so instead of just chaos affecting enemies in a radius, this makes it also, weirdly, have a sphere area, kind of like Limbo's Cataclysm, that then gets smaller over time. And that area only lasts 50% of the ability's duration. What is this for? You can kind of put it in an enemy spawn point, but Chaos doesn't have that insane a duration. You know, if you build a ton of duration, but then you won't have a bunch of range, I don't know what this is for. I think D tier. Chaos is good, and this is certainly doing more than Pacifying Bolts, but not a lot more, which I think evens out. So I'm going to say D tier. Assimilate is in the category, for me, where a couple other augments have been so far, of augments that should be innate. Absorb on its own is really bad. You don't... Why? I guess you can AFK on an objective and defend it. Why can't you just move during... I don't know. It feels like an outdated ability. This is good in the world where you need to use it. I just wish you didn't need to use it. For the purposes of this video, as I've said a few times on similar augments, I'm not going to affect like the tier rating or the discussion about the mod just because I think it shouldn't exist, but it shouldn't exist. That's how I feel. It makes you slow, but you can move while in a defensive bubble. I don't really think this keeps you alive so much better than other ways of staying alive or defending yourself. More because the other ways of staying alive or defending yourself with damage reduction or healing do a good enough job. I'm not sure this earns the penalty of making you slow. If you're a pretty old player, that is, if you've played Warframe for a long time, you probably have your operator and you have Mind Sprint, and you can use that to move around while using this. So it's not really a big deal. You can use weird stuff like melee combos, or the Twin Bazulk have an augment where you do a heavy attack and you teleport to move in this, but is it rewarding you for doing that? I'm not convinced it is. Yeah, in the context of Nyx, I guess, like, why not survive with this? C tier, maybe? But not amazing. And again, grumble, grumble, why does this exist? Grumble, 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 grumble. Oberon. Smite Infusion is one in our increasing line of elemental buffing abilities, and it doesn't have a critical flaw, not a huge flaw, but definitely a problem that a lot of them have, which is that they're single elements. Radiation is a combined element, so you don't have to worry about this changing the elements on your allies' weapons. It also can't change the elements on weapons. Sometimes that could have utility for you, the player, if you did it on purpose. This doesn't do that. If you give people a lot of radiation, it might make them do worse damage, because they'll then be doing radiation status effects instead of like corrosive or viral. But the thing about these that makes them generally so just good, not amazing, but just good, is the base value for strength and duration is so good that you could just slap it on and do nothing else. And it's often like a moderate, perfectly welcome amount of radiation. And the radiation is also like perfectly fine. It's good against alloy armored enemies like bombards. Radiation status effects disable Eximus auras that would affect allies like those ancients that defend nearby dudes. That's good. Yeah, it's good. Solid. What's the rating? A tier. Yeah, this is really good. I wouldn't play Oberon without this. It's so much value for like nothing. You just plop it on. It's a mod slot. I think it's worth the mod slot. Hallowed Eruption, really weird one, pretty interesting. Changes the ability. You can't cast multiple grass. Instead, you grass and then reactivate your grass and it explodes. It also gets more duration. What's cool about that, that's a lot of duration. That means the duration and strength are both damage multipliers. So if you get okay range, this is where it gets a little worse. You kind of have to build good range and duration and strength, and then they multiply. The overall damage is not amazing on its own, but it is giving you a lot of duration, and then you get, a head start building a bunch of strength as well. That's totally good. I also think a notable use case here is to simply put your hallowed ground in the most valuable place for it to be on the objective, and then just bank the 100% duration and have it have really long duration. I think this is pretty good, and being able to use it in a few different ways, probably mostly just for the passive duration, and then is it worth not being able to make multiple hallowed grounds in exchange for one of them having longer duration, much longer duration? That's a good trade. It's not worth it or not worth it. It can be a good trade. Solid, yeah. I would say A tier, mostly for the use case of it making the duration longer. Used as a nuke thing, I did that, and I feel like it really jeopardizes your ability to do anything else, but the damage is kind of a B tier thing, maybe. Phoenix Renewal. People affected by Renewal, your heal, including you, can be revived once every 90 seconds with 50% health. In like the steel, not the steel path, in arbitrations, this can be very convenient. 90 seconds is a while. If you're dying, the question about this is always like, won't you die again in 90 seconds? But maybe you and party members that are close together, but are you close together? It's hard. I like this, but I think it's probably maybe a C or a B tier in effectiveness, probably B. Yeah, not dying can sometimes be convenient. A lot of the time in Warframe, it doesn't matter. It probably deserves to be a C tier, because a lot of the time in Warframe, is it really such a big deal to not die? I mean, to die and then it doesn't save you if you're going to die again within 90 seconds. Yeah, probably C tier, but I do really like this augment, I'll admit. Hallowed Reckoning. Ooh. F tier. Enemies affected by Reckoning spawn a little zone under them that is minuscule. It's like 2 meters or something. Does it say on the wiki? That'd be interesting. 2 meters. It is 2 meters. It's so small, and it's not affected by range. The area does 150 damage over 10 seconds? Is that true? Per second. It's worded wrong. Okay, that's still extremely bad, but okay. And then if you stand on it, it increases armor. This is F tier. It's unusable. The areas are so small. Like, you won't notice this. You have to stand. It's hard to stand on them because this is so bad. Maybe I'm overreacting and it's a D tier, but I'm not, and it's an F tier. The only way that this might be a D tier for me would be if Oberon's other augments were bad, and they're not. So use one of those instead. It's so bad. Use it if you own it, because it's funny. That's what I'll say. Octavia augments. You can have 2 mallets, but they have reduced range. Yeah, it's an augment slot. Like, I think a weirdness here is that you're kind of not gaining or losing something exactly. You get to make sort of an oval-ish, a Venn diagram shaped mallet instead of a circular mallet. The total area you're covering is I'm not the world's best geometry student, but range. So range is really good because you're increasing the radius, which makes the total area bigger. It has like negative diminishing returns. The more range, the better range is. So 50% reduced range, it's like they're both half, right? Not exactly. I'm not going to try because I honestly don't know the exact math on what, how much total area you're getting. But you're basically changing the shape of Mallet into like a Venn diagram instead of a circle. I think a lot of the time in Warframe that's good, and a lot of the time it's bad. And in neither situation is it a huge deal. So yeah, this is a pretty preference-focused one in the first place. It's probably fine. I'm gonna say C tier. I'm not compelled to use a mod slot for this, but I wouldn't be like massively worse off if it's just not a big deal. C tier. Conductor. Ooh. It's an Exilus augment. This lets you control where your resonator is. You can activate it to make your resonator go somewhere, and critically, it doesn't say this in the mod description, once you've done that once, resonator doesn't move on its own anymore. It just stays there. That is very good. I don't think this should be an Exilus mod, or a mod. I think this should just be innate. I think you should be able to control where resonator goes, because I don't think the ability is that good without it. It's way too random without it. That being said, again, after putting it in this separate category that I'm not having affect its tier, where I say I think this should just be innate to the ability, it isn't innate to the ability. So how good is this? Really good. I think Resonator is usually not that good by itself, but this lets you make Resonator be a long duration defensive area, and you can leave and it stays there. That's very good zone control. This becomes one of the better zone control abilities in the game, and it's an Exilus augment. I'm going to say A tier. Again, I wish this didn't exist and was just part of the ability, but in a world where it doesn't, I'm not going to stamp my foot. It's really good. You should totally use this. It's a helmet ability as well, which is solid. Protea. Repair a dispensary. You can hold the ability to make a different kind of dispensary that can revive sentinels or MOAs every 60 seconds. It doesn't say exactly, but this means you cannot have the normal type of dispensary. So any way to be able to revive companions is welcome when you need it. A lot of players don't need that, and the cost is a little... Yeah, and not being able to use a dispensary, that's really good. Dispensary is really good. This is a helmet ability, and it is an Exilus augment. So, but there are other ways to revive your companion. So I'm not sure. And as that list increases, it's going to be hard. I think this is C tier. It does what it says it does. But I think it's important to remember when you have something like this with a cooldown on when it can revive your companion, hard cooldown, you need to think, if my companion died, if something killed it, won't it be killed again? I don't know. It doesn't feel like a complete solution. So I'm going to say C tier. That's all Protea's got. Revenant. Thrall Pact makes your enthrall. When you enthrall an enemy, you get primary weapon damage. Is it base damage? It is. So it's additive with things like Serration. So not a huge damage increase. It is affected by strength. It actually is a huge damage increase because it's 25% per thrall. So the thing about this for me is that when you use Mesmer Skin and enemies attack you, they get stunned and you get a free cast of Enthrall. So that's good. It only affects your primary. How often are you going to do that? You're not going to do that all the time. You have to stop and do the animation for Enthrall. So that's the thing. And then, yeah, maybe that's like 2 or 3 enemies and you have 100%, 200% strength. So that's 150, like another Serration. That's not bad. I don't think that's amazing, but it's solid. I think B tier. It doesn't cost energy to use this moderately effectively because of Mesmer Skin. So that's pretty good. But the damage bonus is not great, but not terrible. Definitely not terrible at all. It's just average. It's a good damage bonus. It's like an arcane that boosts your weapon's damage. And we have Blinding Reeve. Enemies hit are blinded by fog. I'm pretty sure this opens them to finishers and stealth multipliers. That being said, I don't think Reeve is that great. But yeah, opening them to finishers is fine. Reeve just doesn't hit that many enemies, I feel, and most of the other things you would do would just kill the enemies. It can just kill the enemies if you enthrall them. That's okay. I feel like this is C or B. You're then going to follow up by meleeing the enemies, I guess. I don't know. It seems like you could have just meleeed the enemies. I think it's C tier. I know some people really like this, but this is a big one that asks the question, what could you have done instead of this? a lot. And I don't think you should do this. Go figure. But it's not terrible. Opening enemies to finishers is not bad, not so bad, as long as the stealth damage multiplier applies. Rhino augments, Ironclad Charge. So Rhino Charge gives you a bunch of armor temporarily. What's really good about this is you can use Iron Skin during the duration, and it snapshots. So you'll lose the armor buff, but you keep the very heavy Iron Skin. If you group enemies up somehow and then charge into them and then cast Iron Skin, you can get completely insane amounts of armor that you will never have enemies get through. There is a question about like, but you could just recast Iron Skin. I think you save time by doing it this way. So this is solid in that it gives you a huge numerical amount of armor. You could not focus on Iron Skin, build duration, charge into enemies, and get like a massive 30-second armor buff or something. That's also a thing, I suppose. Yeah, that's really good. I think A tier makes Rhino a lot better. It's something he's good at. The only strike against this is whether you need more defense on Rhino. But I think a lot of the time you gain something by not needing to, worry about Iron Skin as much. So go figure. Speaking of worrying about Iron Skin as much, put this in the growing category of augments that should just be innate. This does damage, and this one actually does do pretty significant damage because it's just the remaining health. That can be a huge number as damage, and it knocks enemies down. That's a nice bonus. But mostly this exists to let you recast Iron Skin. You should just be able to recast Iron Skin in my book. I don't think this could be an augment without that benefit, and you just roll that in. I just feel like not being able to recast things is tedious and awkward and creates corner cases where you die for like a weird reason. I don't know. So that's, you could disagree. I know a lot of people don't, but there's an argument against it, but I really think this should just be innate. That being said, yeah, being able to refresh Iron Skin is amazing. So it just immediate A tier. And then the damage is not bad. A really good bonus for something that I wish wasn't an augment. Speaking of which, just duplicate everything I said about Iron Shrapnel for this one, and then it does a puncture status effect. This one is faring way worse because it hardly does anything when you cast it. It just lets Roar be recast. You don't need to recast Roar nearly as badly, and it also does almost literally nothing else. It doesn't like basically kill every enemy in the radius. C or D tier. You don't need to be able to recast Roar, and this doesn't really do anything except that. So yeah, D tier. Definitely at least D tier, because it gets a spiritual knock for I said it wasn't going to affect it, that it should be rolled into the base ability functionality, but what are you going to do? Anyway, finally we have Reinforcing Stomp. Rhino Stomp hitting enemies heals Iron Skin. Interesting. Why do we keep making augments that are solutions to things that should be core ability functionality for Rhino? This means that almost all of Rhino's augments are just Iron Skin can now be refreshed. You could argue that Ironclad Charge making Iron Skin more tanky would also not be very good if you could refresh Iron Skin. So indirectly, this is a lot worse. It at least does something different if you could just recast Iron Skin. But anyway, the tier of the thing. Yeah, Rhino Stomp is fine. 80 is not very much. Certainly if you build some strength, that's not bad, but it's not great. I think this is maybe a C or a B in effectiveness. That's not a ton, even if you hit 15 enemies and you have 100-ish% strength. That's like 3,000 or something health that you get back. That's okay. You'd have to build a good amount of range and you have to hit 15 enemies with it. So I don't know. Yeah, it's okay. But again, just let people refresh Iron Skin. I don't know. Saryn, some weird ones. Revealing Spores. This is an Excellus augment. You can see enemies that are infected on the minimap. Yeah, this is pretty useful. This helps you understand where your spores are going. I thought that was kind of a catch with this one, though. Yeah, it marks them as green instead of red, so you can notice the thing. To me, the drawback here, I'm kind of remembering now, is this is I think the only place where, yeah, the only place where the catch applies before we get to recently imported mods from Conclave. So seeing enemies on the minimap is helpful. As you spread spores, it's often really useful to know, where are enemies spored and where do I want to push the spores to? And you can kind of rotate around the map that way. You can learn that and just kind of do it, but this makes it way more clear. And it's an Exilus mod. That's great. It has a weird, totally unnecessary drawback that I would say in the game we have puts it in maybe C tier, D tier, D tier. And that drawback is that you can't equip it alongside Venom Dose for no reason. This is going in another category, different from the category of this should just be an 8. This category is this augment only has a problem because you unnecessarily can't equip it at the same time as another augment. There's nothing mechanically about revealing spores and Venom Dose that means you can't equip both at once. It's just like a thing in Warframe for no particular reason that you can't. Until very recently, maybe the past year, there were no abilities with multiple augments that you could equip at the same time. But when some Conclave augments got added in, some new ones, and then there was a few like this, it became for the first time true that there were some abilities you could augment twice, but you just can't. There's no mechanical reason, really. It's probably some weird programming thing. That sucks. It's valuable. Make that a thing that we can do. So revealing spores gets a knock. That's not its fault. This is a cool effect. I'm happy this exists. There's no reason you shouldn't be able to equip these both at the same time, and I do think this is much better most of the time. Corrosive, damage buffing corrosive. These are all pretty good because they have good base damage values and duration. You don't have to invest much in them. You just plop it on and cast it, and you get more damage, elemental damage. This one is a combined element, so it doesn't muck up your or your allies' elements, and the combined element it is an element you almost always want. Phenomenal, easy A, maybe S, one of the best damage buffs in the game. Usually better than things like Roar or most base damage buffs, even things that are separate multipliers. This is usually better because you can build it to be a pretty similar value. You can build it to be a similar amount of damage. But this gives you corrosive status effects and the corrosive damage type for that damage. Generally, that is going to be better. And again, the base value is really good. Very good. I think probably this earns an S. I've tried to be really sparing with that. Regenerative Molt. This makes Saryn's Molt regenerate health. Meh. I don't think Molt is that great. So this is a way to heal yourself as a Warframe. This is kind of the middle of the pack for me for Warframe healing abilities. Molt has no animation or anything. You can just click it and you go. My benchmark for healing being good is can you multitask while healing? And you can with this. This does let you multitask. But the healing it's not bad. It's not at all bad, and it's affected by strength. I just don't think it's incredible. I thought there was some catch where you can't do duration. Yeah, the regeneration effect isn't directly affected by duration, but that's got a weird interaction with Molt expiring naturally. So yeah, go figure. I think it's fine. This is maybe a C or a B for healing. I do think this is a good standard to think about other Warframe healing abilities with. It costs you no time. It just costs you energy, and it's sort of enough healing. That's how I evaluate this. So maybe a C or a B. Then we have Contagion Cloud. Toxic Lash. I really like this augment. It's spicy. When you kill enemies, you create toxic clouds that deal toxin damage per second. Pretty okay base value for something you can activate multiple times. And the duration is pretty good. The range is pretty good. And the damage doubles for melee kills. Toxic Lash is really good. This is pretty good. You get lingering damage where you were killing stuff before. I just want to double check my memory that it's all affected by stats, and it is. Yeah, this is phenomenal. You just need there to be enough enemies for it to hit. Also, Saryn is dabbing in the thumbnail. I mean, the YouTuber mistake in the mod card picture. S tier damage. No, I think it's an A. This doesn't help you kill enemies in the first place. It just keeps you going if enemies go to the same place and you're killing them. In a lot of types of missions, that doesn't happen. But when it does, defense mission, sanctuary onslaught, maybe interception, the duration is good. This is great, but it often doesn't really accomplish much. So definitely A tier. I do think that falls short of Venom Dose. But yeah, very, very good. You can make the map very difficult to be alive in. if you use that. Titania augments. Spellbound Harvest, great way to get energy. You can't refresh Spellbind on the same targets. So you hit 4, you get energy. Cool. The energy is affected by strength and not by efficiency. So you can have high strength, low efficiency. The ability costs a bit more, but you get way more energy. Great. Even without any modifications, you gain energy. All good. You can't recast it on enemies it's on. If you build negative duration, not sure you want to do that on Titania for other reasons, but if you did, you could make it work. So certainly there are builds where that'd be fine. It just, there are drawbacks to doing that, right? You get a lot of energy, which is great. This is also a Helminth ability, so it's a Helminth augment. I think this is quite solid. Notably, this is a good way to restore energy, even when some other ways to restore energy, like Protea's Dispensary, are not bad, but less good if you have very low duration and if you have high range. That's a situation in which many energy restoring abilities are bad, but this one gets better in that situation. Well, not long range, but low duration. Good stuff. A tier. This gives you a ton of energy, and if you build a certain way, it gives you infinite energy. Beguiling a Lantern. The only knock against this is it doesn't actually, it's just giving you energy. It's not to be overstated. It doesn't actually do anything. You do need to do something with the energy. Lantern attracts enemies, groups them together around one enemy, and then they take more melee damage. The wiki says it's a separate multiplier, and it's affected by strength, so that's good. I don't think Lantern is that good. I think this is a B. This is a really awkward way to get more damage. I just feel like you can just get more damage. You don't really need to jump through hoops, and I also just don't think Lantern is that powerful. It's not terrible, though, and it's a good damage buff, so it deserves a B if you want to use it. I don't know. Seems a little not incredible to me. What is incredible is Razorwing Blitz. You get a lot of flight speed and fire rate. You can fly with this ability. It's affected by strength. The duration's not great, but yeah, you can just cast Spellbind on yourself 4 times and fly. Like, open world, you are cooking. Like, and in normal missions, it's a big fire rate buff, which is of course a damage increase. It is, you know, so Titania's Dex Pixia don't really have great crit chance, and that means you have space to mod them for fire rate. You probably don't gain much by modding them for fire rate and then doing this, so it's sort of like that would free up mod space, kind of, that for you to do another multiplier, but there sort of isn't one there. So you're just adding to something you already have, but it's still a pretty good damage increase. It's great. It's just not quite as good as it would be. If Dex Pixia had crit, this would be nuts. Like, you wouldn't do anything else when you wanted to do damage. Well, that's not true, but anyway, it's great. Easy A tier. That being said, the flight speed is unusably fast for most normal players in almost every actual Warframe mission, so Dex Pixia things, Razorwing things. We finally came to this one. So like a few other augments in the Exilus slot that disable something about a Warframe, Nezha has one that disables the slidiness. Some people might want to play Nezha's abilities but not want the slidiness. That's understandable. Like, maybe it makes people nauseous. I can understand that. It is a trade-off to be slidey. Zephyr has one where she's not floaty. It is a trade-off to be floaty. And again, some players might just not like that. There's no real cost to allowing those mods to exist and saying, okay, I guess those players can be included, even if, you know, there are 46 other Warframes, they could just play someone else, but why not let them turn that small thing off if it makes them motion sick or something? This, to me, is in a different category. There is no reason to not have a vacuum effect. There is never ever a reason not to have a vacuum effect. You can hear, and this is immature of me, that I'm kind of angry this exists. I feel like a very small number of very vocal and stupid, I'm sorry, players complained that you should optimize around not getting an energy orb by taking off a vacuum. You can do that, but what's stupid is not your preference. You can like whatever you want, but to argue that that's good advice. Folks, you all listening at this part of the video, you're reasonable people. Don't argue that something is good advice because it's good for you. think about whether it's good advice. Developers, you should know better and not put this in your game. You should just put vacuum everywhere, because there is no disadvantage to not having a vacuum. And first of all, on Titania, you can't energy without... I'm not talking about this augment anymore, but it does not deserve to exist. The game is worse for it existing. You might think that, well, but it includes people, no matter how misguided they are. Yeah, it's including people, whatever. It gives people the wrong idea about something about the game that I feel like, what? You could do an options menu setting where you disable vacuum. I don't know. Way too fine a pin on it. If you don't want to get an energy orb because you have 299 energy and you would waste it and only gain 1 energy and have 300, you can stay away from enemies. You can still not pick up an energy orb. Indulge me this one thing I'm annoyed about. This mod sucks. Forget it exists. Let's move on as quickly as humanly possible. Trinity augments. Pool of Life. When you kill the Well of Life target, it drops 4 health orbs and can drop an energy orb. With Equilibrium, that's a lot of energy. It's kind of the same as Protea's Dispensary, though, so it's competing there. If Protea's Dispensary was an augment, it would get an A or maybe even an S. So I think this deserves to be a B or a C. I'm going to say C because this restores hardly any energy without Equilibrium, and Well of Life is a lot less of a good ability for other things besides restoring energy. So you do kind of need 2 slots, Equilibrium and the Pool of Life augment. And then the cherry on top, or the nail in the coffin, is that Trinity already has an ability that restores energy. So yeah, as a Helminth ability, it can restore a lot of energy, but Protea's Dispensary is nearly always better in every way at doing that thing with Equilibrium. And you can also use it without Equilibrium and still get energy, and without an augment, which is why I'm going to say this is D tier. This is probably the best D tier augment we've had so far. It's good, it's just really bad in context for Trinity and then for a different reason for everybody else. Vampire Leech. Excess energy restores shields. It can restore over shields. Yeah, cool. So as long as you make a lot of energy, which you can just spam the ability, spam energy vampire, you make a lot of overshields. This is really good. Can give you a really big defensive boost. Trinity's really good at restoring every other, like health. And then everybody has a bunch of energy. Why not a ton of overshields? I think this is great. Maybe A tier, if not for the fact that you do need to cast. Sometimes it's hard to have full energy. So B tier. And in some situations, a bunch of overshields is not good, but it usually is. I'm gonna say B tier, and I want to encourage you with this one. Finally, Abating Link. Enemies linked get armor reduction. You can fairly easily make it 100% armor reduction. Yeah, this is cool, provided that you're okay with killing the enemies that are linked. You have this kind of proximity tanking thing, where as long as you get close to enemies, you have some damage reduction, pretty substantial link damage reduction, and then enemies lose all their armor periodically. This is great because it's a way of removing armor that you just activate, and then you have to fulfill its condition, getting near enemies, and it just keeps removing armor from new targets, which is really nice. Not a lot of abilities that remove armor do that. That being said, you do have to build a lot of strength that I don't know I otherwise would have. So it is a little demanding. You also want some range and some duration. So it's not cheap as far as build space, but it's very effective. A tier armor removing ability. Again, like many of these, you have to want to be doing that, but it's not bad to be doing that. Valkyr has 5 as well, because one of them is a second Hysteria augment. Swing Line. Rip Line doesn't really do anything, so this is not Parkour 2.0 worthy. I'm going to say F tier. It doesn't accomplish anything. It's very fun, in my subjective opinion, to Spider-Man around, but it doesn't accomplish anything to use this augment. Eternal War. This is basically infinite duration for Warcry. You can extend the duration 2 seconds, and that basically you just have a gauge. It doesn't show this on screen, but imagine a gauge that is the full duration that Warcry has that you have modded. So like 15 seconds or something. All you have to do is, within every 15 seconds, buffer it back up by getting a kill for Eternal War, and you will pretty much just have permanent Warcry. It's not even particularly necessary to have permanent Warcry, but golly gee willikers, is that a lot of duration for Warcry? A tier, sure, Warcry is a good combat buff. Prolonged Paralysis. Paralysis doesn't do much on its own. It's a weird shield nuke that kind of stuns enemies. This pulls enemies together. Pulling enemies together is really good. This might be the worst way to do it. The range isn't so bad. It's 10 meters at base. And then, yeah, the pull is kind of slow. It's a little weird looking too. I actually sort of find it amusing how this looks. It does knock enemies over, so you could use that for, ground finishers or something. But for the most part, it's just a bad grouping ability, which I think is probably a C. Grouping abilities are very good. You can kill enemies in group really efficiently. This one is just very mediocre, so it's a C. Enraged. Like previously with some other augments, we need to treat Enraged a little differently for an unfortunate reason, and that's that at the moment, arbitrarily, you cannot augment an ability with two effects at the same time, even if they could mechanically coexist. There's just a thing in Warframe right now where you can't have two augments on the same ability. For a while, there weren't any abilities that had two augments, then they added some, and for whatever reason, you just can't have both at once. Some of them mechanically conflict, these don't. So we'll talk about both of them. Hysteria's damage increases, the crit chance increases, but instead of being a channeled ability, now it has a cooldown. And now it has a base energy cost and has no drain. On balance, pretty good. Hysteria is weird because it gives you a really good weapon and it makes you unkillable, but you have really powerful weapons, and Valkyr is very, very tanky. So certainly this is good in the sense that it makes the ability have more of a selling point. It just does way more damage. That's good, totally. Yeah, I think this makes Hysteria into kind of a B or an A tier weapon. Still not totally ideal though, and having a cooldown is not ideal either. But you can use other weapons, not the end of the world. I think I would say A tier if you could use it all the time. Hysterical Assault, which again you can't use at the same time, is I think the one you will probably end up dropping. You can use the secondary fire button or the alt fire button to lock onto enemies and leap really far. I don't think it accomplishes much, but I guess with range, does it it is affected by range. Yeah, it might be an okay way to travel, but my experience with this hasn't been very good. And again, I don't think this is a good trade-off with by using this you then can't use Enraged. There's really no mechanical reason you can't. That's just how it is for no reason. So if you could use both, it's an Excellus augment. Why not? I don't know. That's pretty far, sure. I think a lot of the time in some environments that is faster than just moving, but I don't think it's better than making Hysteria actually do really good damage. So C tier, I guess? I don't know. Not C tier for use the other one instead. Vauban. Tesla Bank is a weird one. Tesla Nervos will attach to enemies, and then if you deal damage to them and the enemy dies, you do that damage as a burst. It's electricity damage. It's not going to do the status effects or whatever that probably actually killed the enemy. So unless you've dealt with armor or shields or something, this can be surprisingly underwhelming, but it is a damage effect that isn't affected by, strength. And it will kind of just happen in the environment. You can throw these out. You get 4 of them. And as they do their thing, you can give Tesla Nervos to other Warframes. With the helmet system, they'll just kind of be there, and when you trigger one, they'll just expand your damage, cataclysm. I can imagine something like Saryn spores with this, and then occasionally it will chain react and kind of push further. A cool idea. I've tried that a lot, and it hasn't worked great. B tier. Photon Repeater. This one has a sexy name. If you hit 5 enemies, it doesn't cost energy. My memory is that the radius of this ability is only okay, but Vauban has an ability to pull enemies into a group, so pretty good. You could basically just spam it. Sweet. B or A tier, provided that you're playing, toward it. And then Repelling Bastille. Kind of a 2-for-1. You get a benefit for Bastille and then also a benefit for Vortex. Bastille keeps enemies out, and Vortex, you can throw more Vortexes in to keep the duration going. If I remember correctly, you can make Vortex last forever. Oh yeah, it's got a cap, but it's like 5 minutes, so basically forever. It's not a big deal. So yeah, you can have Vortex forever. Vortex's range is okay. It's good, but not great. Yeah, that's good. Having a constant thing that just sucks enemies together is very solid. I'm not sure you gain a ton by adding new vortexes in. Like, can't you just cast another one? So I'm going to say maybe B tier, and mostly for the repelling enemies out ability, which could be really good for an interception point or some such. You keep enemies out, and then if enemies were on there, you can help get them off a little. That's okay. You probably still need to kill them. It's all right. I think it's B tier. It's some okay utility for some very good abilities. Volt, ooh, Shock Trooper. So this is an interesting one because electricity is a solid damage type to add. Oftentimes you're going to be adding like maybe on top of viral. That's not bad. The electricity status effect damage will be improved by viral. It could make corrosive with toxin. There's a lot of innate toxin in Warframe as well. So a lot of allies that don't have their weapons modded a particular way will just be given toxin by this. It's perfectly solid. Yeah, like all of the elemental buffing augments, and there are a lot of them, 5 or 6. They have good base strength and duration, so you don't have to do much. Just plop this on, you get some value. Good stuff. Like with Ember's version, the only minor knock against this is that adding electricity status effects does relatively little for Volt because you already have so much electricity flying around. Still really good. I think B tier is how I've been rating those. Maybe A tier for the better ones. I think this one is fine. I wouldn't focus on the benefit to your allies, but unless they have only innate cold damage, you won't give them magnetics, so that's fine. Shocking speed. If you're speed running a mission, this with a lot of strength makes you auto kill things that you run into. Otherwise, it really doesn't do a lot. The radius is small and the damage amount is also very low. I'm going to say D tier. If you're speed running a mission, you don't need to kill the enemies because you can just run past them. I don't think this does much. That being said, you can melee automatically prime enemies for condition overload, so that's good. There are a lot of abilities that can do that. I guess you could have 2 at once. Yeah, I think that's D tier, but you could argue that's maybe a C or something. Transistor Shield. This one is a little bit complicated. Allies can pick up Electric Shield, whatever. 300% of the damage the shield absorbs becomes bonus damage stored in Volt's passive. Forget about it being Volt's passive for a second. Basically, there's a battery that caps at 1,000. And as your electric shield blocks damage, electric shield is great. You can pick it up and move with it, shoot with your secondary or melee. Electric shield's great, so we're assuming you're using that. You store up to 1,000 damage. And whenever you attack with anything, that gets consumed. If you take in damage very quickly and put out damage very quickly, you add up to a flat 1,000 damage to every single shot. On a sniper rifle, that's not good. On like a machine gun pistol, that's amazing if you're taking a lot of damage in. On the steel path, this can be disgusting in like a really mathematically awkward way where you need to take a lot of damage in, but then fire really quickly, and then it will put a lot of damage out. You want to be emptying Volt's static discharge as fast as possible and filling it as fast as possible at the same time, and then this will do really good damage. But this is weird because it's really, really, really bad if you're not at a very high level. Finally, capacitance. You make a ton of overshields. Based on the damage dealt with those Tesla coils on enemies, you get a ton of overshields. Yeah, perfectly solid, pretty straightforward. This ability can do pretty good damage to groups of enemies too. Probably B tier. It's a good way to stay alive. Discharge is a good ability. You do need... maybe it's A tier. I've used this a lot, and I feel like it's not amazing. It's not to be overstated, but it does keep you alive. Volt has a really good shield. I think that's why I feel that way. Take it or leave it. B or A tier. It's good. It's a lot of shields and you get them by using a really good ability. Wisp. Fused a reservoir. This lets you deploy a reservoir that gives you the effects of all 3 reservoirs at once, and it costs the same amount of energy. This just saves you a button press, basically. But it's an Excalibur mod, so cool. This is one where I'm tempted to remind you that at the moment, you can't use multiple augments for the same ability at once. So if Reservoir gets another augment, yeah, there's really not a reason not to use this for the convenience of having the option. A lot of the time, not always, you might want to deploy all of them together, and you have the option, and it's an Excalibur mod. But would I use this instead of pretty much any other Reservoir augment? No, the one doesn't exist at the moment, though. A tier, I want this if I'm playing Wisp currently. Critical Surge. When you teleport to a reservoir, Breach Surge, you 50% more energy? Yes, it cuts the energy in half. Okay, 50% less energy, and you get critical chance for sniper rifles per meter traveled. In practice, I'll save you the mental math, it's not very hard to get the full critical chance, and it's a ton of critical chance. That's 350% crit chance is crazy. The challenge here is to find a sniper rifle with which to apply that critical chance to a horde shooter without hitting every single enemy in the head. If you really like doing that, this is an easy sell for you. But yeah, there are some explosive or explosive-ish sniper rifles, so I don't think it's that hard to use this. Yeah, this is totally solid. I think this is an A tier, a massive critical chance buff. It's just a little awkward how you have to get it, and it is to a pretty narrow category of weapons, but it's a massive value. Does this have any special relationship with strength? It's affected by strength, but I'm pretty sure that it caps at some amount. I just can't remember. You'll have to forgive me. But in any case, if it caps at 350%, that's still incredible. That wouldn't really change my rating. At that point, it's like an irrelevantly large amount. Getting down to the end here, we have Wukong and Zephyr left. Let's start with Wukong, who has Celestial Stomp, solid augment. You can hold the Celestial Twin button to make your twin basically do Rhino's Rhino Stomp. Lift enemies into the air. Really, really big radius, and it only costs 25 energy. And you don't do anything, you just kind of hold the button. This is awesome, like A or maybe even S tier. This might be the best crowd control ability in the game if all you want is for enemies to not move. You don't really get any other perks. It's not like they're open to finishers or take more damage or anything else. It just crowd controls enemies in an extremely large area if you build strength. To my memory, this also goes through walls. Very good. Maybe A, or I think I'll give it an S tier. Enveloping Cloud. Like Ash's augment that lets you stealth allies with his smoke bomb. This lets you stealth allies near the cloud. 4 meters? What is this for? What are these stealth ones for? If you play with a coordinated group of friends, maybe. Cloudwalker's big selling point is you move pretty quick in Cloudwalker. So I don't see this being beneficial. D tier, for me, this, like compared to Ash's smoke bomb one that stealths your allies, you just have to be near them for a second and then they get the stealth. This you have to, oh, you just fly by them. Okay, yeah. Okay. I was sort of thinking of it wrong. And I was remembering staying on enemies. Maybe I tested this wrong. Yeah, that's fine. If you wanted to stealth people, I think I rated Ash's a C, so this should probably be about the same. Cloudwalker's good, perfectly fine. Primal Rage. You get crit chance as you kill enemies with Primal Fury, up to 150%. Yeah, the stance just isn't that great. The Primal Fury is just fine. This is a good damage increase. I think it's maybe a C or a B. There's questionable value to warframes that come with a weapon that is good if you don't have good weapons, but doesn't compete with those weapons if you have them. It's like if you just get that warframe, they like come with a weapon, like a starter weapon, but then you'll eventually not be using it if you just want the effectiveness. Like if you like it, that's fine. This is good damage for it. It does fine damage, but that's kind of a weird value proposition. You see what I'm saying? So I'm going to say like C, B, maybe tier. Certainly if you really like this, it's, yeah, B. But I'm going to say C. Finally, Zephyr. Also 5 augments, but one of them is the third of the current 3 passive disabling ones. You don't float. Again, there's really no meaning to a tier ranking for this. Zephyr's passive can be good and it can be bad. There's really no opportunity cost for this either, in the sense that you get Power Drift, basically the mod Power Drift, in your Excalibur slot. It's an Excalibur mod. in exchange for turning off her passive. So this mod lets you choose whether you want Zephyr to be floaty. Being floaty can make Zephyr faster moving through the environment, but it can also feel awkward to people. You choose. No real way to rate it though. Tailwind. As you hit enemies, you accumulate damage, and then if you're on the ground, it resets. This was changed, so for a while it was really hard to hit enemies with this, and then it was changed and is now significantly easier. And I now think this is a pretty good experience. I've only used this a little bit myself, but it's a pretty big damage increase, and I think it's doable to hit enemies. I don't love this. I feel like this is maybe a B. Damage from a Warframe ability, good. How you get the damage, yeah, C or B tier maybe. Airburst rounds. As you hit enemies with airburst, you get secondary damage. It's probably base damage. The wiki says it's base damage, so it's additive with Hornet Strike, so it's not this huge damage bonus, but if you have no strength and you hit 9 enemies, you get an extra Hornet Strike. You probably do have strength, so you hit like 4, you get an extra Hornet Strike. That's good. It's only for your secondary. The duration is really good though, and Airburst is really good. Solid. B or an A. Maybe an A because it's attached to an ability that you can so easily imagine this being, you bring an explosive weapon and then you group enemies for the explosive weapon, give it a ton of damage and then shoot it. That's great. So A, just it's on a very fortunate ability. How you get the buff is really good. Jetstream, classic. This is really good in a really weird way. Shotguns have damage fall off, and flight speed increases the fall off range, projectile speed, even for shotguns that do not have projectile speed. So if you have a hit scan shotgun that has fall off range, this makes that fall off range further, like farther away. You do your full damage out to a longer range. So situationally, this will increase the damage of shotguns, and there are some, like Archoplasmor, with a defined flight time. They just fly for a set amount of time, and then they end. Those fly further, of course. So that's weird, but really good. The speed is also really high if you want speed. It's hard to evaluate how that would be an effectiveness thing, but the projectile speed with very specific weapons, that's actually a huge effectiveness increase. You just have to be using those. B, maybe. You don't need a lot of strength to make it work well either, and it scales well with strength. Good stuff. Funnel clouds. You get more tornadoes, they're smaller. So the main use of this is that the tornadoes do a lot of status and they can do an okay amount of damage. So this makes them not pick enemies up and suck them in. Yeah, if you group enemies together so the tornadoes all spawn on them and you build strength, this does a surprising amount of damage. B tier, it's not a crazy amount of damage. There is a question about like why not something else, but once the tornadoes are there, you could use Airburst to suck more enemies in, which is not bad. Yeah, it's okay. If they rove around the map, I don't think that's ideal. Maybe a C or a B, but it can be surprisingly effective. I mean, you're multiplying the damage of one tornado by a lot, which is solid. And that's Zephyr. So now we'll quickly do the ones that are only from PvE to PvP, from PvP to PvE, from Nightwave. There's not a lot of these, as you can see. There's only a handful, and some of them aren't. Ooh, we got most of them actually. Anyway, but there are a few in here we didn't, so I don't know how it's sorting them, but Atlas is rumbled. This lets you become a rumbler. You cannot bullet jump, immediate F tier, but if you could, yeah, you get damage. It's kind of like Iron Skin. You also get to throw, you get this weird rock throw attack. That's also an F tier because it's not very powerful. I think this is fun, but it's really bad in its current state. This is an easy F tier. It makes you way worse off for using it, but fun. It could be better if they revised it a little. Afterburn, we got. Purifying Flames, we didn't get. So this makes allies hit get status immunity. The duration is really low. There are lower status immunity effects, but the duration is quite low. Again, this needs to be evaluated thinking about this awkward moment where you can't currently equip multiple augments for the same ability at once. The healing augment for Fire Blast is fairly solid, so I think that's a knock against this. I'm going to say D tier. It's the status immunity is really short, and you're losing out on another augment that I think is pretty good for the same ability. If you could equip both at once, maybe up to a C, it's okay utility. The duration is bad, but you're kind of just casting Fire Blast, so that it's okay, but I'm going to say D, maybe C if you could equip it at the same time. Purging Slash. Slash Dash removes debuffs and restores shields, but allies have to be in the path of Slash Dash? F tier? D or F tier? It's not actively bad, that's what my F tier has been. You can't really do anything effective with this. The other Slash Dash augment isn't that good either in my estimation. D or F tier. It's not good. We talked about Ice Whip Impedance. Power 3. You can fire 3 arrows with Quiver. So depending on what you're firing, that may or may not matter. 3 dash fires, 3 stealth arrows, 3 sleep arrows. Nice. 3 noise arrows. I don't know. Again, at the moment, unfortunately, you can't equip 2 mods on the same ability at once, 2 augments. And I do think that the big crit buff, the crit damage buff from being on a dash wire from the other Quiver augment, is usually more valuable than this by a lot. It's different, but I do think it's a more valuable effect. It'd be really good if you could use both at once. I don't know why you can't. Probably going to say that a few more times in this section. Deceptive Bond. Loki's decoy absorbs damage, but the decoy gives you some damage? Why? F tier. No. Terrible. What? No. Stop. Also, Decoy's other augment isn't great, but it does at least keep you alive if you hide it somewhere. This could actually get you killed faster, and the decoy's not tanky, so that's not, I don't know. My experience with this has been terrible. Maybe it's D tier if you put it somewhere and then it's damage reduction. I have a very poor opinion of this, but yeah, I guess maybe D tier. I guess I can sort of see how it could be good. Whilst we did Prism Guard. The prism stays on your shoulder, and now it has a duration instead of an energy drain over time. Except it still has the energy drain over time, and the duration is 4 seconds. Why? Why would you do this? You can't use the other Prism Augment, which exists, or does it not? I thought there was another Prism Augment. I'm probably going crazy. Mirage is maybe not my favorite frame, you'll forgive me. When I use this, I did like having it on my shoulder, but the duration is way too short. Prism, though, does have this thing where, if I'm remembering correctly, the more targets the lasers hit, the more damage it does. There's some weird, like very hidden mechanic like that. I kind of think this is good with that if you move very fast. So if you build a speed frame and then you give Mirage a speed ability is what you have to do, and then you use this and you run really quickly through a level, okay, maybe you've got something there. I remember doing that and feeling okay about it. I don't know. Maybe C or B tier, though, because the duration is very short. C if you're focusing on the duration, B if you're focusing on that combo and the damage. Checking if there's any more. Singularity. This makes you not use the other augment for Absorb, which lets you do stuff during it, and instead it sucks enemies into it, which I don't... And the energy drain is doubled every 3 seconds. That's a hidden mechanic. Okay. No, F tier. Bad. The only good thing about this ability would be using it with Assimilate. So you can't do that, and the effect makes you lose all your energy. I guess dragging an enemy, that's not F tier, it's D tier, but I'm not happy about it. Entrapment we've done. And finally, Recharge Barrier. Again, like many of the mods in this category, you can't equip this and Transistor Shield at the same time, and I think Transistor Shield is really good. Go look at Volt section for that. Why? This is a very bad benefit in exchange for not having Transistor Shield. You can walk through the shield and get shields back. It doesn't restore overshields. The wiki only activates once per shield placed. Ooh, big damage. All right, folks, there it is. Thanks for listening to me talk about every single augment mod for Warframes anyway. That's not a Conclave mod. I guess we could do Conclave mods at some point if people really wanted. I hope you found stuff that you'd find interesting. I was also interested in doing this because I wanted to see how many of these I felt positive about. And it was shockingly few of them. Like, I have a lot of good things to say because I've spent 5 years making as many builds as I possibly can for every single Warframe in the game. You can find videos about those things later on my channel, but yeah, I mean, watch my videos about that stuff previously, rather than focusing on, there are a lot of mods that are individually not great, or maybe shouldn't exist, or why can't you use both at once, or the balance is weird, which is a shame. But a lot of them are really cool, and I hope that you heard some that you didn't think well of, that you thought, oh, that thing you suggested sounds cool, maybe I'll do that and have a good time. I'll see you out there.